prayer or meditation. Thank you. You may be seated. Honorable members, the first item on the order paper is questions addressed to ministers in the Social Services Cluster. Members may press the talk button on their desks if they wish to ask a supplementary question. I wish to remind honorable members that names of members requesting supplementary question will be cleared as soon as the member of the executive starts answering the fourth supplementary question. The first question has been asked by Honorable M.F. Nkadimeng to the Minister of Human Settlements.
Deputy Speaker.
Yes, Honorable Member.
Deputy Speaker, may I address you in terms of Rule 138 of the National Assembly rules?
Yes, ma'am.
Deputy Speaker, I'd like to find out from you whether any ministers have indicated they will not be present in the House today. It was indicated earlier that the Minister of Basic Education, once again, is not available in the House to answer questions. This is becoming a serial occurrence with this particular minister, and it is undermining the ability of members of this House to exercise the oversight of the executive, which you set out very clearly in your affidavit in a recent court case, the importance of oral questions as an arena of executive accountability. And I really think it's high time that this Parliament starts to take proactive and concrete steps against serial constitutional delinquents who miss their opportunities to be held accountable in this House. And I wondered if you could share with us the reasons why the Minister is not in the House today.
Okay, come back. Yes, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this matter was discussed in the Chief Whip's Forum this morning. And if I want to be kind, I'll say it's regrettable that 3 ministers are not going to be here, but it's really not acceptable that the National Minister of Basic Education, Social Development and Arts and Culture are not going to be here to answer questions. These questions have been placed on the order paper. They should know that they should be here, and it's not acceptable that a deputy or somebody else should be answering on their behalf. And we agreed in the Chief Whip's Forum, and I don't know if it has been brought to your attention, Honourable Deputy Speaker, that before we start with the question session, you make it clear from the table that the Chief Whip's Forum takes strong exception to these ministers not being here, in particular basic education and social development. I think arts and culture had responded because he had another commitment. So we just hope the announcement comes from the table, because Parliament needs to be taken very, very seriously by members of the executive, particularly on question day.
Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I've been recognized, Chief. Sit down.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. No, I just want to say that on the Chief's Forum, we spoke about this thing very strongly. And then we were told that the Deputy Minister of Basic Education will be here. And then we said, all of us as Chief Whips, that we don't want the Deputy Minister of Basic Education to respond. Because this Minister of Basic Education, one, that department is in crisis. And she has been not here for a long time. So we agreed with that question will be deferred for the next week to be attended to. Secondly, we also condemn the fact that the Minister of Social Development, now our grannies, our pensioners, they want to know why are those long queues in the post offices. Even if you engage with the department, there is no straight answer. The second thing is that 2 of them, the minister and the deputy minister, they are not here to answer to our grannies who are expecting answers from this Parliament. So, Deputy Speaker, we're expecting you to announce that, because our people are waiting at home. They want to know about those long queues in post offices. Thank you.
Honourable Kubisa.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. As you know, this matter has been going on without a solution. And I mentioned at the Chief Whip's Forum that there is a plethora of issues that are affecting basic education. And it is unacceptable that the minister has not been there for quite a long time to respond to questions. Only the Deputy Minister has always been present. Now the questions will be carried over. We find that learners step one another in schools, and a number of, it's just a myriad of issues that have got to be attended to. And we want to put it on record again as the National Freedom Party, that we are not happy about this matter. It must be attended to as soon as possible.
Honorable Kwankwa.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. We would also like to align ourselves with what our colleagues have expressed here, because indeed this matter was discussed in the Chief Whips Forum. I think I want to appeal once more, I don't know whether it's for the 10th or 11th time, to members of the executive to understand that the work we do here as the opposition, especially when we ask these questions, we ask them on behalf of the people who have sent us to come and hold them to account on the issues and how they spend taxpayers' monies and implement government programs. So it's important that going forward, Parliament becomes a lot stricter, especially to the usual suspects like the Minister of Basic Education, who seem not to be taking the work we do here as Parliament very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Malloy.
No, thanks, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure why are we using this platform to reopen the discussions that took place at the Chief Whips Forum. Now, honorable members are right that the matter was discussed in the Chief Whips Forum, and a decision was taken in the Chief Whips Forum that a letter must be written to the Speaker and to the Leader of Government Business to attend to this issue. Now, as to why are we bringing that discussion back to the House, I don't know. If we all agreed in the Chief Whips Forum as to what process are we supposed to take. And lastly, Chair, all these members, they know, if a minister or a deputy minister is not in the House to answer a question, that question will stand over in order for us to attend to it next time. So I'm just saying, let's not open discussions that took place and decisions that were taken in other forums in the House. I know that there is television. Somebody want to appear on television and appear very smart, but
Deputy
it's not
Speaker,
necessary.
point of order.
Order,
Deputy Speaker.
Honorable members,
Order.
can I request you, so let me address you and then I'll give you an opportunity
How?
if you still
This man
need
is
it.
abusing us
No,
here.
honorable
He
member-
does not even sit in the
honorable-
Chief Whips Forum.
honorable
He can't
member-
come and abuse this platform here.
Honorable members, we have attention was drawn to us about that discussion. We are equally concerned about the requirements for ministers to be present in the House, and that indeed we will be consulting so that we take forward the communication of the consent to the Leader of Government Business, so that we consult both for purposes of ongoing presence in the House, as well as the arrangement for when the questions will be dealt with. It is our responsibility, constitutionally and otherwise, to ensure that that happens, and we share the concern all members have and the agreements that we have reached. We will act on those agreements, and we feel that the Leader of Government Business will be addressed on this matter urgently so that it can be attended and a date and time agreed to for the sorting out of this matter. Thank you very much, honourable members. I hope we can proceed with that understanding.
Deputy Speaker.
Yes, yes, honourable member.
Deputy Speaker,
Yes.
a number of aspersions have been cast on members of this House. I'd like to address you in terms of Rule 260 of the rules,
Yes.
which makes it very clear that the Chief Whips Forum is not a decision-making body of this Parliament. It is a consultative body, and therefore the deliberative powers and the powers of the House to express itself exist in formalized committees and in this House itself. So for the honourable member to make aspersions about people wanting TV time is frankly not acceptable. This is the correct arena, and I wish that the ministers would want to get a little bit more TV time and pitch up for work.
Honourable members, this matter has been addressed. We will deal with it as I indicated earlier on. Thank you very much.
Deputy Speaker,
Yes, Honourable Carter.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I would like to just place it on record. My hand has been up even before Honourable Kwankwa spoke. I just want to place it on
My
record.
apologies, I didn't see you.
Okay,
Go ahead,
thank you,
Honourable.
Deputy Speaker. Apology accepted. I just want to also just concur with everyone else that spoke that it is absolutely unacceptable, and that please, as you've indicated, the necessary action needs to be taken urgently. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable members, The first question has been asked of the Minister of Human Settlements. Is the Minister?
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Thank you to Honorable Kantimeng. The establishment of Human Settlement Development Bank comprises of 2 phases. Phase 1 comprises of consolidation of the current development financial institution, which is Rural Housing Loan Fund, National Housing Finance Corporation, and National Urban Reconstruction and Housing Agency into one entity. Phase 2 consists of legislative establishment of Human Settlement Development Bank in terms of the current policy and legislation. Phase 1 has been completed, that is consolidation of the current development institution. The only issue outstanding is the approval in terms of Section 66 of the PFMA, which is required from my colleague, the Minister of Finance, for the transfer of assets and liabilities into a single entity. The department has commenced with finalization of business case and drafting the Human Settlement Development Bank bill, including compliance with the required legislation process. I will in due course, in consultation with Cabinet, advise on the time frame for the approval of the business case, as well as submission of the HSDB bill to Cabinet for approval and introduction to Parliament. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Honorable Nkadimeng.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your prompt and elaborate response. However, Minister, how will the Human Settlement Development Bank improve the lives of poor people living in rural areas, women, youth, child-headed households, and people living with disabilities?
Honorable Minister.
The Human Settlement Development Bank objectives includes the responsibility to ensure that the current rural housing finance programs that are implemented by the department are upscaled. The department currently, through Rural Housing Loan Fund, has successfully implemented incremental housing finance programs in the rural areas, and since its inception, approximately 581,000 loans have been extended to rural households to build expanded houses.
Thank you. Honorable Shalembe.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Honorable Minister, South Africa is faced with corruption, fraud, and maladministration under the leadership of the ANC. As we have seen in the SAA and ESCOM being corrupted by Brian Molefe of the ANC, do you have courage to convince this House and the taxpayers that the establishment of the Human Settlement Development Bank will not be corrupted and prevented from maladministration? I thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Well, definitely, that's why we're establishing a bank, not to be corrupted by whoever is corrupt, but a bank that would provide loans to those people who need houses, because at the moment the commercial banks are not assisting us in that regard.
Honorable Sitole.
Siyabonga, Sekela Somblom. Honorable Minister, the Human Settlement Development Bank has now incorporated 3 previous successful financial entities. My question is, how quickly will these new entities be able to offer the same level of access of access to financing for poor people. What marketing strategies are in place to ensure that the poor and marginalized citizens are made aware of this financial scheme?
Honorable Minister.
As I said earlier, once those few obstacles are sorted out, this bank will be operational, Deputy Speaker. Now, definitely we're talking about banks that are operating already, have assets already, and that consolidation is putting all those assets together. But at the moment, we are also talking to some commercial banks that are able to assist us in strengthening the development bank, Human Settlement Development Bank, that I won't mention here. But as far as I'm concerned, as soon as they are established to function, they will be doing what they are doing already, because it's them that assist those who belong to social houses who also wants loan for those houses. In most cases, it's not the commercial bank, it's one of these banks whenever there's somebody who wants a loan. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable Carter.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It is estimated that some 18,000 affordable housing units could be developed in the spatially well-located Eysterplaat near Cape Town CBD, should the Air Force agree to move its operations from Eysterplaat. Now, do you support the possible relocation of the Air Force from this site for affordable housing purposes? And what other government SOE land and SOE land around Cape Town has government identified for low-cost and affordable housing purposes?
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Even though the question is not in line with the development bank, yes, I do support. If there's no use for that piece of land, if that land is offered for low-income housing, I do support that, because it's about time that we change the apartheid special plan and put our people near resources, transport, and their jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question has been asked by the Honorable Singh to the Minister of Health. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. The issue of foreign South Africans who are trained abroad as medical students. The National Department of Health consulted widely with affected stakeholders, which included representatives of students who had studied abroad. And at the meeting of the National Health Council on June 2018, a policy was adopted by the National Health Council which provide guidelines on the requirements to be followed for these professionals and others who qualified abroad. In terms of this policy, future students who wish to study medicine must register with the Health Professions Council and ensure that the university at which they wish to study is recognized by the council. The council will maintain a list of universities that they recognize, and if the university does not appear on the list, the prospective student must first apply and get confirmation that such a university is indeed recognized. For students who are currently studying abroad, provision has been made for them to register until July 2019. This registration is necessary to allow for planning to accommodate these students on our clinical platform. Once the students have graduated, they will be required to undertake a clinical bridging program. Prior to this, the degree will be assessed by the Health Professions Council. Then they will be put into a bridging program as agreed with the South African Committee of Medical Deans. Once they go through that, through the assessment and the bridging course, then they will be eligible to enter the system through internship and also community service. So that's in brief the process which we have agreed And the Health Professions Council has also indicated that they are ready to implement such a system. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Okay, Honorable Singh.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. I might as well walk across and sit with the Deputy Speaker, and the Deputy Minister, and ask him my question. But for the record, Honorable Deputy Speaker and Honorable Deputy Minister, whilst we recognize that there is this policy that has been released, you see, there is lack of clarity with this policy. There's been consultation, which you speak about, but I don't think we as members of Parliament have been consulted. Everybody else has been consulted, but not we as members of Parliament. I don't want to ask specific questions related to the guidelines, but just to give you one example, these guidelines, which were published on the 25th of June 2018, as you said, speaks about clarifying the process, speaks about a list of accredited institutions. This morning, I sent an email to the HPCSA asking them where I can locate those accredited institutions on the website. And the answer came as follows: good day. The list is not on our website and cannot be accessible at this stage. So that is the challenge we are having, Honorable Deputy Minister. And I hope that without me having to ask any questions, please arrange a meeting with the HPCSA and us who are involved, representing people on the ground, so we can seek clarity to the number of issues that we have. For example, you and I positively sorted out the question of board examinations. And many students wrote the examination. There are a few challenges in that regard which can still be sorted out. But let us have a meeting with them. Let us clarify these situations. I don't want to come to Parliament and ask questions in this forum, but I think if you facilitate it, we can get the matters sorted out. So will you give us that assurance, Honorable Deputy Minister? Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker, and thanks to Honorable Singh. As I've indicated, this policy was adopted, that's now about 2 months ago. So what needs to follow, which is the reason why we also, in recognition of that, said the students who are already studying have time to can register with the Health Professions Council, because we knew that all the systems will not be immediately ready, because the Health Professions Council must then identify those universities. I'm sure they will start with the common countries where already we have students studying abroad, studying medicine abroad, and look at those countries and look at the kind of curriculum of those medical schools and universities, and then go further and broaden up. So the database, I will assume that the Health Professions Council will incrementally build a database of universities which they recognize their curriculums. But we can arrange through the committee to invite the Health Professions Council so that there can be a much deeper discussion on the matter. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. Honorable Maisela.
Thank you, Chair. We have said it many times that we are not going to do the evaluation of the government NHI program, because nobody actually cost a program. We cost it and budget for it as we implement it and as we roll it. You can't have an estimate for the whole project, which is going to be in stages if many years. So the universal health care coverage is going to be rolled in piece by piece, or year by year. So nobody has ever tried to cost the cost of democracy, but we knew that we had to have it, and nobody has ever costed the cost of the present private health care. So having said that,
Honorable Maisela, I'm afraid you have exhausted your time with your statement. Okay. We have to proceed to the next. Your time is expired, sir. I'm sorry. Honorable Deputy Minister, you may comment if you so wish, otherwise we proceed to the next.
I think, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Unfortunately, the honorable member is not following up on the Honorable Singh's question.
Yes.
So I would prefer that we skip.
Okay. Honorable Tlangwini.
Deputy Speaker, despite disalignment between foreign acquired medical degrees and the South African own medical qualification norms and standards and the National Qualification Framework Act, it makes no sense why government has embarked on an expensive program like this without having applied its mind on the realignment between foreign acquired medical qualifications and our own policies that exist in the country. It makes government and the department look no better than a spider which acts without thinking. Now, despite the fact that there's this disalignment, the HPCA has collapsed and members of the board have reduced it to a cash cow where they pay themselves and have run their council down the ground. Now, the question is the minister aware of this?
Honorable member, your
and
time has
furthermore,
expired.
is he aware that the board has been used as a
Honorable
cash cow?
member, your time has expired.
Thank you so much.
And please do indicate that I have to call out names of members who are doing follow-ups. If you are not the person, do indicate so publicly so that you just proceed and speak as you are in Tlangwini. You are not. So next time, don't do that mistake. Honorable Deputy Minister, I don't know whether there was any question to respond to if you heard it at all.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, the honorable member in fact just cast aspersions on the Health Professions Council. He didn't actually ask a question about the training of students. He's casting aspersion on the Health Professions Council. But I can assure the House that while the Health Professions Council does have some challenges in terms of full capacity and implementing all its programs, it's functional. We do interact with it on a regular basis.
I'll share rise on a point of order.
What's your point of order, honorable member?
The deputy minister is really...
Honorable member.
Listening. Let me rise on a point of order.
What's your point of order, honorable
The point of order is that the deputy minister, for some reason which I don't know, is misleading the House.
No, you see, you are engaging in dialogue and this is not allowed. You can't do that.
It is misleading because
No,
he says
honorable member, take your seat.
On the council.
Honorable member, take your seat or I switch off your mic. Go, honorable minister, finish what you were saying.
Yeah.
No, honorable member, just be orderly. What's wrong with you? Proceed, honorable
Yes,
deputy minister.
honorable Deputy Speaker, let me pass that. I can assure the House that the Health Professions Council is functional. As I said, it might have shortcomings in maybe turnaround time on some of the tasks, but it's functional. And on this particular matter, we've been interacting with the Health Professions Council. Even earlier today, I spoke to the president of the council, assured me they are on board. They are going to do an evaluation of the degree which is acquired outside South Africa. Once they are happy with it, we have discussed with the deans of medical schools. They will provide the bridging course, and then the process will flow. So I can assure the House that this is going to work.
Thank you. Honorable James.
Thank you, Chair. Given that all hospitals are short of doctors, what impact would it make on these doctors' shortages if all these South Africans with foreign degrees who have applied to practice were allowed to do so? Thank you, Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Well, Chair, this system is really to address that, but at the same time, protect the South African public. Because you need to have a quality assurance system, which says that if I come here and say I've got a certificate, I qualified in country A, B, C, D at this university, how do we make sure? Because here, you're not talking about somebody who's going to repair cars or machines, but it's going to deal with human life. And you know the kind of challenges we have, sometimes malpractice and so on. So it's to make sure that there's a quality assurance system. Allow the people to come in. Once they've been assured, be given a chance, be tested, be put through a system, and once they qualify through all that system, then they get fully registered. So it will speed up the process of quality assurance and registration. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, question 64, which was asked by Honorable Mabiga to the Minister of Basic Education. I'm informed that there has been a request for all the questions to be dealt with in the manner in which it was suggested consultation take place. As a result, we will now move to question 60. This one too is asked to the Minister of Social Development, who is not here. Now, let me see now. The Minister of Sports and Recreation to respond to Honorable Strike Ralchoma. Honorable Minister of Sports and Recreation, asked by Honorable Ralchoma.
Deputy Speaker, our response is to the fact that the central aspects to the findings and recommendations of the fifth EPG report include, first, to establish a platform to orchestrate, coordinate, and align the programs and activities of all school sport role players, and to maximize participation opportunity with respect to underage teams and competition. Secondly, to resolve issues between basic education and sport and recreation with respect to teacher involvement in the organization of school sport and retraining of teachers. Thirdly, to ensure appropriate protection mechanisms and processes for school sport participants against mental and physical abuse where they are in place, and revise the national school priority sport structure, and also each component of the school sport system to set up programs aligned to the EPG findings, and consider the introduction of a penalty system for ongoing compliance with charter targets, and also to improve women representation in all sports structures on and off the field of play. And lastly, that good progress has been made, particularly since the review of our MOU between the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Sport and Recreation over some of these matters. And we are monitoring the system. I thank you.
Honorable Ralchoma.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I'm quite happy that you are focusing on the key areas. I'm more interested, Honorable Minister, on those federations that are not moving, particularly around meeting their own targets that come from them. What measures are you going to take to ensure that they comply? Because at this stage, as you know, Honorable Minister, we are persuading them and they give us their own targets. We don't impose targets on them. So it is expected that they should really assist us. And there are those that are doing well, for instance, like rugby, although we are still far in terms of the targets. So what measures, penalty measures, are we going to take?
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much once more. Indeed, progress that has been achieved from the 2016-2017 EPG report was the fact that on top of the targets that they set themselves, and we were assessing them around those targets, we do have a positive response around 8 of the codes that have met their targets, whilst 11 have not. And in terms of following that up, every year the EPG has to get back to each and every code and get to understand why it has not met its own set targets because they set themselves the target, and we monitor as they set the targets if they are not just ticking the box, but it is meant to lead to the transformation that we're looking at. What has been introduced in the current year are the punitive measures for each of the codes that does not meet its targets, and at the same time, even those that have met in the in-depth assessment, it has been also identified that in terms of the year-on-year, they have not been meeting the targets, but meeting only yearly targets. So we are following and making sure that they do, and hopefully in the next report, we're going to be getting into those previously unmet targets, but also the targets moving forward for each of the codes. And fortunately, this year, even the 11 constitute some of those that have even signed, because earlier on, it were only the top 5 that have signed and set themselves targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Msongo of the DA, TW.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, thank you very much. Minister, do you support EPG? And I can put it to you that it is not working. And one of the things that you spoke of, MOU, they don't implement MOU with school sports. And I believe, as I'm putting it to you, it's not working. We need total change. And one of the things that I can highlight, that we must come up with a road show. Do you support that we must have a road show to speak to players, expertise in sports, to make sports productive and to sustain all inroads for us to make sure that transformation takes place in South Africa?
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's no way I would not support EPG, because this is the product of the department to ensure that we monitor transformation in the sporting sector. So this is a product of the National Department of Sport to implement transformation. And it is working, and there is tremendous progress, positive progress. They would not implement the MOU with basic education, because as you would know, we've been working to review the MOU, and we signed it on the 31st of May this year, the reviewed MOU, because the previous one had challenges, and we have moved a very big ground in terms of implementing specific aspects of the MOU. This year, we can share with you our plan, which is what then is going to assist MOU in terms of focus on school sport. But ordinarily, they've been dealing with the codes broadly and outside school sport. And the implementation, in sharing with you the implementation, you will see all the role players that are participating, that we are happy to have, and the buy-in that we have from various of the sporting codes. And therefore, when you say there must be a roadshow to players, our task is beyond just looking into the players. It is more to also ensure that South Africans, in terms of the sports plan, about 50% of South Africans become active in both sport and recreation. So our task is beyond what we are suggesting, and that is what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Stole.
Siyabonga, Sekela Somlomo. Honorable Minister, just my question, what I want to find out, when can we expect an implementation plan and timeline for the implementation of this transformation charter, specifically in regard to the Department of Sports and Recreation and Basic Education? When are we going to see the final planning of the shelter? Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, honorable members. Maybe Honorable Stole would have to differentiate between the charter and the MOU between ourselves and basic education. The charter is under implementation. It's part of it.
where we started by setting codes and when we got into the democratic government. But the step forward was the establishment of the EPG itself. And the process is, that is the process of charter implementation. On the side of the MOU with basic education, 5 years elapsed in terms of the previous MOU, which had its challenges that made us not to move any bigger ground. But the current one that has got now an implementation plan since the signing in May has got timelines within which who of the role players has to do what. And it also incorporates that plan incorporates the forum that sits that also involves all other critical role players that we are seeking to involve for us to be able to implement the school sports program effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Carter.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, you know what, before I start, Deputy Speaker, it's Women's Month. Can you please ask your members to stop making cat noises? Because I might just get catty. Last week in the National Assembly, we learned of an unacceptable litany of bad governance in respect of entities under the control of your department, of wasteful expenditure, poor labour relations, low staff morale, dysfunctional boards and councils who battle to exercise oversight over their administrations, and of little or no coherence between the objectives of these entities and those of the department as a whole. Do you agree that this is an unacceptable situation, and what is being done about it? Thank you.
Honourable Minister. No, that's out of order, honourable
yeah.
members. Honourable members, you know it's not in the rules for you to do that. That's actually childish.
You know, Deputy Speaker, I just want to say to you, nature cannot control a cat that is on heat.
Honourable member, you are being out of order yourself. You are being out of order yourself. No. Honourable members, please just respect yourself, man. This is lousy. Quite frankly, it's absolutely lousy. You can't also stoop to those levels. Go ahead, Minister.
Thank you very much. Once more, Deputy Speaker. Indeed, if you look into issues of governance or bad governance in the entities, it constitutes one of the areas that continue to be unacceptable. Unfortunately, standing here, I will not be able to get into details of each of the entities, but as part of the work that we do, that's what we monitor. It forms part of what we also prioritize to ensure that a sporting code will not just focus on meeting in terms of individual targets, but it also needs to look into issues of governance, because proper governance then leads to alignment and understanding of what is sought to be delivered through sport and recreation South Africa. So we continuously monitor that. It's part also of our EPG and transformation program, therefore, that we check with entities. And wherever entities then demonstrate such, we are able to also make follow-ups and take them to task. So the reports, therefore, annually would give such reports as to what is happening in each of the entities. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable members. We move to the next question, and it's asked by the Honourable Bozoli to the Minister of Higher Education and Training. Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Let me say to Professor Bozoli that I'm not sure that at this time I'm asking the administrator for improvements. There are three priority areas: in response to your question that I have asked the administrator to focus on. The first is to pay very, very concentrated attention to finalizing the closeout of the 2017 and 2018 funding cycles. A number of processes are involved with that particular area. For example, ensuring that students receive confirmation that they will be funded if this hasn't been done already, that their details and particularly registration confirmation is done, that they sign the bursary agreement forms, and that their allowances are paid out. So that's the first priority. The second is that steps must be taken in line with preparations that have already been underway to launch the 2019 application cycle in early September. And I will be making an announcement later this week in that regard. And then the third is to support us in developing an effective plan in consultation with colleges and universities to manage the funding of students in 2019, in order that students that apply from when we open applications this year and those who are already beneficiaries know their funding status and response from NSFAS before registration begins in 2019. So those are the three priorities that I've asked him to focus on. As to improvements, I think we'll come to that later. This is tough enough, but that's where we want to start. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Bozoli.
Thank you very much, Minister. That's very helpful. Look, NSFAS has announced that its deadline for students to finalize their funding is actually the end of this week, Friday. How many students remain unfunded at the moment? And how many do you think might remain unfunded after Friday because they may not have signed their agreements or for other bureaucratic reasons? And what do you envisage will happen to those students if they don't meet the Friday deadline? Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
We're working around the clock to ensure that we reach as many of the students that are currently not funded. You'd recognize that part of the difficulty we have is as we process the applications, and particularly since we're dealing with 17, 8, and 18, we're finding that there are going to be a number of students who will receive quite a significant sum of money. So we're looking at how we would address that as well, because they have not been funded for quite a significant period. In terms of the statistics I have received from the administrator, we're looking at around 63,000 students, with the majority coming from the TVET college sector. So there's less of a problem in the universities, but certainly with respect to TVET college students, we have a significant problem. What is pleasing is in the first 7 days of the work of the administrator, we've received massive cooperation from institutions, and I'm really appreciative of that, as well as student organizations playing a role in ensuring that students do sign the statement of particulars, because that then helps us to finalize the application process and ensure that we have disbursements. So within the next 4 days, we're going to see significant disbursement of funding, because we are getting the SOPs back in quite a large stream, and I'm pleased about that. But there are a number that are not yet processed, particularly with respect to registration confirmation. There are other problems with respect to course code correction, as well as tuition fee matching with course code. So all of that is being ironed out. And what I'm happy about is, for the first time on getting a report this week, I actually can have some comfort that the report I'm getting has accuracy associated with it. Thank you very much, Deputy.
Thank you. Honorable Kubisa.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Honorable Minister, just recently, 3 weeks ago, there was a meeting with the department, And the new incumbent to the position of chair of NSFAS mentioned, among other things, that what has caused some problems with regard to NSFAS were issues of centralization of the systems, lack of resources, human capital, material, and technical, students not signing the agreements or signing late after receiving the offers, or lack of information that is cascaded to schools so that students are aware of what is happening with regard to NSFAS before they enroll at universities and TVET colleges. Now, I would like to find out, Honorable Minister, how you are going to utilize the student formations to assist in this process. And then secondly, there is the issue of students who reside in flats that are threatened by landlords from time to time when they have not received their fund.
Your time has expired. Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I have said before that I think a large part of the problem related to the ability of NSFAS to execute a significant administrative exercise, but also we had the problem of the introduction of the so-called student-centered model, which was piloted in a few institutions in 2016 and then introduced to the whole sector in 2017 without an adequate evaluation. So clearly, that model was a problem and we need to move away from it. I think institutions must play a role of support and should know who's applying, who needs assistance, and so on. But they were out of the loop because the process jumped institutions. So that has to alter significantly. Secondly, the student organizations have actually been playing a very important role, as have SRCs, in ensuring we communicate. But I believe in developing a new system, we have to make better use of technology. Most students have access to a mobile phone. We should have an app, which is a NSFAS app. They should be able to check information fairly speedily. We should be using local educational establishments, libraries, to song centers. So I think online support and processes would be a very important addition to what we need to do. But that, of course, is looking into the future. For now, let us solve the problems of 2017-18, and let's successfully introduce 2019. As to the nature of system we will develop, it's from the experience of the administrator and what he alerts us to, along with an expert support team, as new modifications for ensuring we have an appropriate and best system in place. So that is being worked on, and when we're ready, we will make the appropriate announcements. I have said that communication has to be improved. We don't have proper pamphlets or leaflets that are explanatory and very easy to access, that are available for young people, either at school level or even when you've exited the school system. All that must be improved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Hlonyani.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, this is not us accusing you. You admitted yourself earlier this year that NSFAS system has collapsed when you said application for next year will not be open until NSFAS sort out payments backlogs from 2017 and 2018. These backlogs will never be sorted because to date, some students are yet to sign their schedules of particulars, and many have not received food allowances since February. Our students are not eating, and it is impossible to learn properly on an empty stomach. Our SRCs are now forced to raise funds so that they can provide students with 1 meal a day, like at the University of Limpopo. But this is not sustainable, and students must get their allocations. Can you commit here before the House when the backlog will be sorted and students get their allowances? Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I challenge you to identify a media statement in which I use the word collapsed. And I would welcome to see that because it would mean somebody forged my name. Secondly, with respect to the problems, I have just indicated that these are being solved and that disbursements will begin as from tomorrow. So students who've not been receiving funding, who signed this schedule of particulars and who have been confirmed as registered by institutions will begin to receive their money. Not just the funds of 2018, but those who have a backlog will receive those funds from 2017 year as well. As for SRCs raising money, I think that spirit of voluntarism has been an absolute point of admiration for me. It should never have happened, but I admire the young people of our country who have stood up in support of fellow students to assist them. I believe this is the nature of individual, that is the legacy that we've asked all of us to be in terms of Tata Nelson Mandela and Mrs. Sisulu. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Volmarans.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Honorable Minister. Noting that work has started on the development of a new student funding policy for students at the universities and TVET colleges, which will include the academic and academic service and ethical requirements of students linked to receiving the funding. How will this policy contribute to improving the administration of NSFAS funding to students? And will the policy have any impact on the review of the student-centered model? Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Volmarans. Clearly, all that we're trying to do is to ensure that we indeed improve the system. And I think having the association of access to the full bursary with academic performance is an important criterion which had existed in the past model of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And matters of ethics and integrity are absolutely imperative. We would like to ensure that funds are spent in a manner that is in accord with the purpose for which young people are in college or university, which is to study and complete their courses. The Honorable Nkwakwa yesterday pointed out concerns with respect to utilization of the Xbox vouchers, where students try to ask shopkeepers for cash to be given in exchange for food vouchers, and then some go and purchase alcohol. It's not all students who do that, but any use of the funds in that way is not how we intend it to be used. It's not part of policy. And therefore, I think we would have to look at what form of sanction there might be in cases where there would be abuse of funds that the public are making available for the support of the young people of our country. Thank you very much, Deputy.
Thank you very much, honorable members. That does with question 78. We now move to question 65, asked by Honorable C.C. September to the Minister of Higher Education.
Thank you very much again, Deputy Speaker. You didn't even give me time to catch my breath. Deputy Speaker, honorable members would be aware that I have appointed Dr. Randall Carolison as the administrator of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme in terms of the act that gave life to the scheme. His responsibilities are those that I've referred to in response to the question from Professor Bozzoli, the closeout that I've made a reference to earlier, as well as the development of a viable plan for the 2019 funding cycle. We will be putting in place a support team to assist Dr. Correlison, and we've identified the following areas as critical to attend to. So the team will consist of skills in student financial aid management, human resources management, information technology, because of the integration challenges that we've had, and of course business systems analytics and other skills that the administrator may convey to me as he becomes familiar with the work that he should do. We are currently in discussion with him as well as officials in the department as to what skills we need and the most appropriate persons who can assist us. And I thank honorable members who have sent names in to me, because I think the list has been a very useful one to develop. We will work through that team with staff at NSFAS and ensure that within the period of 12 months of the administration, the staff are given the capacity and training to be able to undertake the work appropriately, so that we have long-term stability and that the entity is able to execute its mandate. I have asked the administrator to advise me as to whether there are any areas that he, in the course of his work, might identify as areas where there was malfeasance or some form of fraudulent utilization of the funding, so that then I can decide whether or not I should appoint a forensic team to carry out further investigation. And he's doing his work, is looking at whether there are such instances which may merit such a decision by myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I'm informed that Honorable Killian will take charge of the question on behalf of Honorable September. Honorable Killian.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, and thank you very much, Minister, for your very extensive reply. In fact, the question that I wanted to pose was surrounding improved business processes and an integrated system between universities and NSFAS as it is. But could you also just please indicate, in this process, will they consider possibly reintroducing officers at institutions? We are aware that students had great difficulty to follow up on their allocations in terms of NSFAS bursaries, and the local footprint of NSFAS was definitely missed at university and technical college campuses. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Minister.
Chairperson, let me be honest and confess that I am not in support of a large institution that then takes up a lot of the money that should go to students. I believe information communication technology is an important resource in ensuring that you can reach as many young people and institutions as possible. So my own preference, but again, this will depend on the experience accrued by the administrator, but my preference is that we would work with financial aid officers at institutions rather than creating national student financial aid officers, which then become a huge operational cost for the scheme. So I'm really more persuaded that it is at the systems level, it's more analytics and systems development that we should focus upon, and that it is the honorable members who would assist us to inform young people and ensure that they know they can apply and what is needed in order to apply successfully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The next follow-up question will come from Honorable Professor Pozzoli.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, you didn't answer part of my question, which is what would happen to some of the 63,000 students still unfunded if they didn't get funded by the end of this week? But my main question is, you've mentioned the student-centered model as being the main cause of all these problems in NSFAS. But you must agree surely that the failure of NSFAS to disburse its funding must be almost entirely a result of the surprise fee-free funding announcement by President Zuma 8 months ago, rendering the department unprepared to implement this announcement and all of the new criteria that it involved. Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Well, Honorable Bozoli, I'm not sure how many times one would repeat this. We're working hard through the administrator to ensure that funding reaches students who should have funding. Not all of the outstanding number will receive their funding this week because there are queries, but what I'm happy about is that we actually now have numbers that we can have rather assurance that they give us a proper picture of the problem. You'll also be aware that we had been releasing upfront payments to institutions and that students had signed to indicate that they've received money. So there's steps that we had taken. Significant funds were released in April, a further tranche in June. So we have been making funding available. As to the challenges or problems being entirely related to the announcement of free higher education for poor and working class students, I'm afraid I cannot agree. I believe it is a factor, but it can't be entirely laid at the door of that announcement, particularly given that you have outstanding applications not processed from 2017 before the announcement was made. So no, I don't believe that it rests entirely with this announcement. I believe there are many other factors, and this is why the set of issues to be addressed are so many. It's not just one thing, because there are many, many human resource and other issues that are related to the inadequacies that we identified. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The next question will be asked by Honorable Kubisa.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Honorable Minister, no doubt this question is related to the previous one. I want to refer again to the previous briefing that the Portfolio Committee recently held, and where management, the board of NSFAS, student formations, TVET college principals and other stakeholders attended and made presentations. Now, the issue of the usage of technology and the devolution of the system came quite sharply. And it was also mentioned that there are other centers that will be utilized, like municipalities and centers where the broadband for technology is available, they will be used. Can you inform this House, Honorable Minister, what is it that has been done to ensure that those centers will be utilized? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kubisa. Honorable Minister.
At this point, they've not been used, because as I've said, what we need to work on is developing a system and process that we will be assured will work in the way that we wish it to work, which is efficiently and in the interests of students. So at this point, we haven't got to where you would like us to be. But we've agreed with the administrator that better use of information systems will vastly improve what we're able to do. So already we've begun speaking to libraries, for example, many of which are connected throughout the country. And they are willing to allow young people and to support them as they apply. Schools have media centers, computer centers, because they teach computer applied technologies. So already we've begun the discussions, but I don't want to say definitively this is what is going to happen. I think we must investigate properly, because if you take half measures, that's when you land back to the kinds of problems we have had to deal with. But we're fully alert to the need to be broader, to the need to use technology more appropriately, and to the need to ensure that whatever we have is in association with post-secondary institutions and not separate from them. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. The last follow-up question is from Honorable Matias.
Madam Minister, if it was not you, it was your predecessor who publicly admitted that NSFAS was under stress and as a result was facing serious burden and to a point where it was collapsing under a heavy burden of bureaucratic and institutional corruption. Now, if that was the admission made by your predecessor, what measures do you take to ensure that we turn the system around? The model that you are so fond of, is it working? And if it's not working, why don't you replace it with a working model? If social development can distribute social grants so effectively until the Gupta minister was appointed, why don't you use that model to distribute NSFAS for deserving students?
Thank you. Honorable Minister.
Honorable Matias, o botsa potso e ntle. Me wa e seng ya falefa. Se re lekang go se dira ke go baakanya. We would not have appointed an administrator if nothing was wrong. So that's the first point, that we have appointed someone who has assumed the full competence of a board. We've dissolved the board. So I think recognize gore tiro ya direga, gore ra araba mo go na le mathata teng. Because I think what you should do is acknowledge. And it's a, how mpitsa madam ke a tshoga tle. But thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The next question, question number 50, has been asked by Honorable Mapanga to the Minister of Health. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Chairperson. Indeed, the Barberton area has 10 primary healthcare clinics, 1 community health center, 1 district hospital, and 1 TB specialized hospital. The community health center operates on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week to ensure coverage. The 10 clinics operate only during the working hours of from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. The Barberton District Hospital is on a heritage site, and as such, there are limitations in terms of what can be demolished and what can be, and even when you refurbish, there are rules in terms of how you preserve the heritage component. The nurses' home is indeed dilapidated, and it's on the provincial program for infrastructure for 2020 to 2021. Is a matter which we will need to follow up with the province, whether it can be brought forward. But at the current moment, what they are reporting is that the nurses' home is on their program for 2020 to 2021 financial year. With regard to staff complement, there are enough professional nurses in the entire health complex, even though majority happen to be in the hospital, and from time to time they also do redeploy them to the clinics. But there is definitely a shortage of lower categories such as enrolled nurses, assistant nurses, administration clerks, data capturers, cleaners, and groundsmen. So the provincial department is working on the recruitment process to increase the number of the lower categories, which we have indicated that currently are running low. So that's what is being done to improve the health facilities and health services in the Barberton area. Thanks, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mapanga, you're allowed to take your follow-up question.
Thanks, House Chair. Ngitibongele nakuwe Deputy Minister impendulo yakho leletha Themba. Ngiyathemba nemphakathi walekhaya eBhaptini eMjindini local municipality uyadivela ukuthi lithini litiko mayelana nedibhedlela dawo kanye nemtholampilo yabo. The follow-up question, Chair, is there any strategy in place to guard against nepotism and bribery during the recruitment process for increasing the number of staff at the lower categories. I thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. Chairperson, the issue of the process of recruitment, we will really depend on the understanding that the provincial department, which is responsible for the human resources, will follow the laws of the country and make sure that any creation of posts, filling of posts should be done in line with the public service legislation and also the constitution and other laws of the country in terms of making sure that it's an open and transparent process of recruitment. We will indeed, now that the honorable member has raised concern, make sure that we do check on that and make sure that it's done according to the laws of the country. But we'll also ask honorable members as public representatives as well in their oversight role to help in terms of making sure that all our institutions follow the laws of the country in whatever operation, including staff recruitment. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. The next follow-up question will be asked by Honorable Singh.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Deputy Minister, for the response. In your response, you mentioned the role of provinces. Now, we have two ministers of finance here, and I think they will know more than anybody else that there's always been a problem with provincial infrastructure grant spend by provinces on providing infrastructure within those provinces. And there have been major challenges in that regard. I would like to know here, has the Department of Health engaged with provincial MECs and put any of them on terms, in terms of saying, spend that money and provide healthcare services in the province, or else we will come in and take over in terms of the constitution, which we are allowed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, thanks, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Singh. Well, our approach is really that of cooperative governance, rather than, which is also within the spirit of the Constitution, while accepting that ultimately national government has to oversee all the functions and activities. But we work on the basis of cooperative governance. We have baseline agreements in terms of guidelines, for instance, in terms of, on this particular matter, in terms of staffing norms. We have the kind of areas which we have agreed with all the provinces as areas on which none of us can compromise. So on a regular basis, we have our National Health Council meetings, which are preceded by meetings. The National Health Council is the MINMEC for the Minister and MECs, but they are always also preceded by regular meetings of the HODs, where on a regular basis we get reports from each and every one of the provinces. We may not be able to get all the details all the time. If you're talking about area of infrastructure, in the reporting from the CFO at the national level, and also from our head of infrastructure, we have we hold a bird's eye view of able to monitor in terms of the progress of implementation on the key areas of service delivery in all the provinces. We hope that the issue of taking over will be really the last resort. We work on the basis that we have to support each other and on the cooperative governance approach. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable James, it's your time.
Thank you, House Chair. Every single hospital visited by the Portfolio Committee in the past 6 months is afflicted by collapsing infrastructure, insufficient funding, staff shortages, and backlogs on accounts. How can you possibly think of introducing the NHI when you can't even provide for basics? Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, Honorable Chair, I think we all admit the fact that as a country, we are going through difficult times economically, and which are affecting our revenue. And it's common knowledge that over the last 2 to 3 years, the allocation of budgets to departments have either stagnated or in some cases reduced. But we are working with all our partners in the provinces to make sure that with the resources available, we have basic minimum standards through which every one of us is bound to comply. And as a result of that, where we pick up problems, like in the last few months, when there were a number of reports, as the honorable member is indicating, we dispatched 200 officials from the national department to actually go out to all provinces to monitor for themselves, to see what is the challenges and give the necessary support. So we don't just sit back and say there are these problems, but we work concurrently with our colleagues in the provinces to give the necessary support. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. The last follow-up question will be asked by Honorable Mkalipi.
Inkomo,
Nkomu, they corrected me yesterday.
Deputy Minister, we were shocked to find that Barberton Clinic has 7 nurses. 7. They are operating with 7 nurses. And Barberton Hospital, only 21 nurses. According to information you have provided to us in the question for written reply, in that same question, we also asked for you to indicate the number of staff vacancies at all healthcare facilities in Mpumalanga, but your department refused to provide such information. So now, you as a minister, you fail to indicate the number of staff vacancies at all clinics and hospitals in Mpumalanga because you yourself do not know how many vacancies are there, which is a reflection of your department, or is it because you are hiding something? If you are hiding something, why are you still occupying this position? If you don't know this information, why are you still occupying this position?
Thank you, your time is up. Honorable Deputy. Inkomu, funda njengami.
Well, thanks, Honorable Chair. I must indicate to Honorable Member that the question she is raising is not a follow-up to this question. It's a separate question. The question which was asked by the Honorable Mapanga did not ask for numbers of staffing. So the Honorable Member may be referring to findings, maybe on oversight visit or on a separate question. But I can assure the Honorable Member that we have nothing to hide. We have nothing to hide. We can come back if specifically her interest is the actual numbers of staff members, and we note what she's saying, but if she can put it in writing in terms of specifically which areas and the numbers, because it's not part of this particular question, we will be able to come back. We have nothing to hide, and I'm sure that our counterparts in the Mpumalanga province also have nothing to hide because they are public servants. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister. We now move to question number 80 that has been asked by the Honorable Wilson to the Minister of Health. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Yeah, thanks, Honorable Chairperson. This is concerning the costing of the National Health Insurance. Honorable Chair and honorable members, the costing of NHI is a complex exercise that at best will provide an estimate based on a set of assumptions. The purpose of the costing exercise is to provide an estimate of the programs for the purpose of planning. The difficulty with this costing exercise is that it is being done while there is significant changes to the structure of the health system. We have to remember that we are not only changing the system of financing, but also the organization of the entire health system, such as the points of entry into the system, referral system to higher levels of care, collective procurement of goods, alternative mechanisms of reimbursement, amongst others. The impact of these interventions combined with the other changes in the environment, the burden of disease, health-seeking behavior, pricing of services, etc., will have an influence on the final cost. Hence, the total cost of NHI depends on a number of implementation choices, which will obviously lead to widely different results. So it's virtually impossible to can pin to a particular figure. We want to just say to honorable members that indeed, if you look at the fact that what the NHI will entail, it's making sure that you pull together a single purchaser of services for the entire population and also pooling of the funds. That in itself gives you volume through which you are able, the mistake which quite often honorable members make is to look at the cost of service, especially at the private care services, in terms of individual costs. Whereas here we're talking about a pooling of a common purchaser, which will then be able to negotiate prices. And we have various examples. If you look at the ARVs, when we started, people thought it was unaffordable. But because we use the volume, we're able to negotiate the cost such that currently they are 1/5 or even sometimes 1/10 of what they would have been if it was individual cost. So, but we can also just indicate that there was a cost estimate done by Treasury some few years ago at the cost of in 2010 prices. And they arrived at the cost which was saying that implementation of the NHI would cost 256 billion rand, which was 70 billion short of the fiscus. Now, if you look at the fact that, if you look currently, the total GDP spent on health is over 400 billion. So if you look at the restructuring of not just the services, but also the funding, you realize that once you restructure the private side and some of those funds come into the pool, this will, even in terms of that estimate, it will be affordable. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm informed that Honorable James will take charge of the question as asked by Honorable Wilson. Honorable James.
Thank you, House Chair. Deputy Minister, principally the NHI is going to cost billions. Given the disproportionate unemployment figures and declining medical aid membership, along with the current fiscal constraints in South Africa, will you advise exactly where the money to fund the NHI will come from?
Thank you. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, Honorable Chair and the member, as I've already alluded to, even on a simple basic scientific study commissioned by National Treasury in 2010, done by actuaries, the average, looking at all kind of factors, they had arrived on a cost basis at that stage in 2010 prices of 256 billion. Now, I'm saying to the honorable members that if you consider the fact that on the one hand, the cost of services, of most of the services, let's start there. We would want to make sure that they are acquired within a public service-based platform. That's the first starting point. And only when you can't get those services by improving through the funding, through the pooling of funds, improving the public service platform, then you acquire some of those services from private providers. But within even that model which was done in 2010, the shortfall, it's far lower than the total spent in terms of GDP spent on health. So what it says is once you start restructuring some of the funds which are now going into private health, also starting to find a way to bring them through the very medical aids, bringing all those into one pool, then it will be possible to fund the national health insurance. There might still be some additional resources to be sourced, but it won't be really something which is totally unaffordable. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mam Kaula, umbuzo olandela ubuya kuwe ma.
Ngibonga sihlalo. Siyavumelana la ne-HI ngoba izosiza abantu bakithi abahluphekayo. Kodwa nje njengoba ezempilo ziwa
phansi ubuthaphuthaphu. Nenkohlakalo idlalubi. Njengoba simbona kwenzeka la emhlabeni. Ngifuna ukwazi ukuthi njoba nekhanda lakhe minister uma ulibheka nje liyadidekile liyaduma lazi uzothatha kuphi nithini ngale nkohlakalo ekhona lana.
Siyabonga ma. Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Chairperson and the Honorable Member. Honorable Chair, the issue of the challenge of corruption, maladministration, it does not depend on what system you're operating in. It's an issue of, a malaise in society. Whether you use NHI or you use whatever Mam Kaule may want to implement, no. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the issue of dealing with maladministration and corruption, it's a matter which we don't even have to be waiting for NHI. We must defeat corruption and maladministration, whatever system we're operating. So it's a matter which, of course, as you plan for a new system, you then must identify the risk areas and make sure that you've got effective systems of mitigating against those risks. But I want to contend that that is not something which must even wait for implementation of NHI. And that's why, as this government, as the ANC, we are focused on making sure that we deal with corruption, as the President has said many times. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Order, Chair.
Yes, Honorable Mkalipi.
Why Minister Pasha can't speak in Sizulu?
Pasha.
Aibo. You must tell us if you are a fake Pasha. No.
That's not a point or an order.
He's not a white person, he's Pasha.
Honorable Singh, you are the next.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chair.
Order, honorable members. Can we allow Honorable Singh to pose the question? Yes.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Somebody who's been described as a certain leading academic, Franz Cronier, states, and I want to quote, that the National Health Insurance Scheme is nothing other than, quote again, essentially a form of expropriation without compensation for the private healthcare industry, close quote. Now, Honorable Chairperson, we as the IFP believe that all South Africans must have access to quality health care. That's a sine qua non in terms of what our Constitution enjoins us to do. What I'd like to know in terms of costs and containing costs, Honorable Deputy Minister, through you, Honorable Chair, what kind of synergistic relationship is envisaged between private healthcare practitioners and service providers and government to ensure that equitable access to healthcare takes place for all South Africans? Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Chairperson. Again, I want to say that the principal differences here is that what is envisaged is to make sure that when you compare what we have now and what we are envisaging, let me just say an honorable member has broken a leg and needs an orthopedic surgeon to operate. At the current moment, you have to go to an orthopedic surgeon and then you'll be told it's going to cost so much, the hospital is going to cost so much, and so on. Now, what is envisaged is a situation where if you take the Cape Town Metro and you've got a number of wards and sections and whatever and so on, in a particular section, as an example, we will have an agreement with a group of orthopedic surgeons to say, you are going to service this particular area as an orthopedic surgeon. This is the population. Anybody with a broken leg here, we will pay you so much per month, and you are going to attend to anybody with a broken leg. So the individual member with a broken leg does not then have to negotiate price, because that specialist has got an agreement with the National Health Insurance
to service the people of that area at a particular reimbursement per month or per 6 months or per year and whatever. So that cut also cuts out the issue of fee for service. So it's not a question that, I mean, when somebody comes, then so many bandages and whatever, but you are costed in terms of the population you are looking after and the average number of operations you're going to do per month, per 6 months, and you are reimbursed accordingly. So that's how you can then negotiate the fees. And the doctor is assured that he's going to get so many patients because they are already under the scheme. So I just giving the members some example of what we are envisaging, how the system would work. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Ra leboga. Mhlonishwa Shilembe.
Deputy Minister, whilst we support the implementation of the National Health Insurance Program, can you assure this House that the implementation will not cost the taxpayers another 1% or more, as we have seen in this current year, from 14% to 15%, as well as the increase on fuels? Ukubona kanye ukubona kabili, awuchaze, Deputy Minister.
Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Well, Chair, Honorable Chairperson, I don't think anybody can really focus on you know, I would be dishonest to come and say in this House that, you know, when the scheme comes, there will not be 0.5% in income tax or in some other area, and it's impossible to want to commit to that. But as I've mentioned earlier on, just when you look at the total spend, the fact that we're already at 8.5% of GDP spent across private and public, if you are just to look at, in other words, if you combine what is spent currently in public and in private, and you look at the cost of looking well after the whole population, it is possible if it is rationalized properly without an additional cost. So the challenge is going to be just in terms of how well can we reorganize the system, how can we reorganize the funding, and make sure that the funds go to the right places, and the over expenditure, perverse incentive is dealt with and is properly managed. So I can assure the honorable member that if we work properly with the support of everybody, it is possible, and it's possible within current national GDP spend. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move to question number 97, as asked by the Honorable Tembekwayo to the Minister of Health. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. The Honorable Member wanted to know about the graduates who are now without jobs. Indeed, there were these young professionals who are skilled and very capable and qualified. We recruited them due to their qualifications. They are all having university degrees in the fields of human resource, finance, and IT. We recruited in total 400 of them. At the time of 2012 to 2017, we had a program on strengthening healthcare systems, which was financed through the European Union. So these unemployed graduates were sent to the School of Governance to be trained in governance. The EU then provided them with a stipend during the training, which was a form of internship. And on completion of the training, they were deployed to hospitals where they did a very good job. During that time, the EU continued to provide the stipend for a year. After that, we again signed a 2-year fixed contract with them, and they were paid a salary, also funded by the EU. It was agreed that at the expiry of the 2-year contract, the provinces would employ them permanently because they would have seen their worth. After 2 years at the expiry of the contract, the provinces were not able, because they said they didn't have the funds and that they were not ready to employ these graduates permanently. We negotiated with the EU, which extended the contracts for another 2 years. Unfortunately, that 2 years also expired. The provinces again still pleaded poverty, that they didn't have the funds to employ them permanently. So at the end of the day, these graduates were not really dismissed. It's just that because most of the provinces said they didn't have the funds, their contracts were not extended. So we are still discussing this with all our colleagues in the provinces, because it's not questionable that these graduates were adding value. So it's an ongoing matter which we keep on raising, but they come back to us to say they don't have adequate funding. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Ke a leboga. Mem Khalipi ke boleletse hore ke wena ya tla tseyang potso ya tlaleletso.
Ewe ma.
Ge.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, but how is that possible that provinces, they can run out of funds? You must just tell us here, which is because of corruption. And in your corruption, you just compromise the young, skilled, unemployed youth, 322 in numbers. And then you come and tell us here in this parliament that provinces said they don't have funds, while we know very well that your department is engulfed by the corruption. So, Deputy Minister, please come forward and tell us what is your plan to rescue these young, professional, skilled young people, because we need their skills. You can't be hiding behind the money that was sourced from the EU, because we in this parliament, we have given you funds, but it's just because there's no political will. Just come clean and tell us, what are you doing about your corrupt officials who are looting the department in the expense of the youth of this country? Thank you.
Ra leboga me, Motlatsa Tona.
Well, Chairperson, I think that's a topic of another day of argument and discussion. We don't dispute the fact that both in the public and in the private sector, in South Africa generally, we do have a challenge of corruption, which we need to root out. But you can't just put everything, every challenge on the door of that. It's simply the hiring of staff is the competence of provinces in terms of our current dispensation, especially when you want to hire people on a permanent basis. At national level, through conditional grants, we can from time to time receive money and provide services through which and on a contractual basis. But once you go into the realm of permanent posts, that rests with the Treasury and the department, the accounting officer and the executing officer at the political level, at the provincial level. So, as I said, it's a matter with which we're discussing on a regular basis, and we hope that at some stage, because there was no argument about the competence and the value add of this cohort of young people, we hope that this matter will be resolved in a very amicable way, and many of them can get employed again. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mahlalela, it's your turn to ask a follow-up question.
No, thank you, House Chair. Taking into consideration the importance of health workforce cadres to improve access to health care for all and achieve the health outcomes, in the context of a vision that requires improved management of health professionals and cadres, we want to understand, Deputy Minister, to what extent did the department undertake gap analysis of the health support workforce as part of a process of preparation for the implementation of the NHI? If such analysis was done, what is the gap analysis that you find? The workforce that will support the health services in order for it to function properly. And if not, why not?
Deputy Minister?
Thanks, Honorable Chair and Honorable Member. Indeed, we have done an analysis at various levels, from a primary health, district, regional, up to tertiary, and also at our academic complexes. The general finding is that in many of our areas, we are heavy on administrative staff rather than technical staff, both at the level of support level, technical in terms of financial management, engineering services, and so on, and also at the level of health professions services, the human resource element in those areas. In some areas also, just to give honorable members an example, we also, our staffing is also quite skewed. If you look at the nursing area, for instance, the public sector is staffed in a skewed way in which what you call generally your nursing sisters, your professional nurses, who are the most senior in the nursing profession. In our public health services, you have a majority of that rather than your enrolled nurses and assistant nurses, whereas the correct staffing is that it should be the other way around. You should have more enrolled nurses, more staff nurses, more assistant nurses, and so on, and then have fewer professional. So there's a lot which needs to be reorganized in the public health system, and to assist with that matter. And that's why, as part of the implementation of the National Health Insurance, we have a specific subcommittee which is looking at the provision of human resources for health. So that's a matter which we are definitely attending to. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable James, it's your turn.
Thank you, Chair. Given the moratorium on the employment of non-medical personnel, how do you expect to solve the staff and service defects in hospitals across the country? Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, Honorable Chair, let me say for a start that we are not aware of any moratorium. What we know is that most of our provinces, their expenditure on compensation of employees is very tight. It's starting to suffocate other services, especially if you look recently also with the agreements on the 7%. And so every other addition which increases the compensation of employees is suffocating the goods and services and other areas. So there is no formal moratorium in anywhere as far as we have interrogated that matter, because it's been out there in the public, but most of our colleagues in the provinces have this tight management. But we have also been saying to, as we discussed, to say it's also not helpful. For instance, if you go, some of the, I won't mention the area, but one of the areas we found that because they have not been employing porters, now you have nursing sisters and doctors having to double up as porters. Now that's a wasteful expenditure, because you're taking a highly skilled person, the time they should be spending with patients, they now have to also wheel patients, you know, from casualty to theater and so on. So it's a matter which we are discussing to say, how do you reprioritize while the fiscus is still tight? So it's not that, so I want to dispute that there is actually no province, as far as we know, which actually has a moratorium. It's just this tightness of the fiscus. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. The last follow-up question will be asked by Honorable Kubiso.
House Chairperson, thank you very much. Honorable Minister, you have just alluded to the fact that there are discussions that are continuing with the provincial departments on matters that are mentioned in the question. But it seems as if all these discussions are informal. And yet, the public health system is collapsing, especially in townships. It's collapsing a lot, and there are no employees that have got skills. Yet, we have dismissed so many young graduates. Now, Honorable Minister, is it not possible that you pilot some legislation that would make it tighter for the department to work in collaboration with the provincial departments, so that these things are enforced?
Thank you. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, I wouldn't agree that the discussions are informal, because the National Health Council is actually regulated in terms of the National Health Act. So its decisions are actually quite formal. Nevertheless, it is true, Honorable Member, that while that is true, it's at the level of policy and decision making to say these are the priorities. But as National Department and Ministry of Health, after having agreed that these are the priorities, we cannot physically create a post, advertise it, and fill it. That in terms of our dispensation, that's how, from a constitutional point of view, to the legal framework, and regulations, that's basically how it functions. So we can influence, we can determine policy and priorities, but we can't physically implement. But that's the matter of subject of discussion of this House. I mean, if at some stage, through the necessary systems, this House comes to a determination that indeed certain aspects of how the architecture of our constitutional and legal arrangement is not helpful, it's open to the Honorable House to can review some of those provisions. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. You can take water for a while now. The next question is question number 55, asked by Honorable Musi to the Minister of Sports and Recreation. Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. And in response to question 55, we are guided by our National Sport and Recreation Plan that is seeking to ensure that at least 50% of South Africans participate in sport and recreation, and it is able to make sure that there's sustainable talent that is identified and developed through programs that would ensure that we have transformed the demographics of the sports sector. So since the inception of the ring-fenced 300 million sport infrastructure in 2016, 94 municipalities in all 9 provinces across the country have benefited. And many of these beneficiary municipalities appreciate our model of delivery as the most effective and appropriate. This is because in their own acknowledgement, the 5% that they are expected to spend on sports facilities from the normal MIG is too insignificant to deliver even the most basic sport and recreation facility, thus compelling them to redirect such to other priorities like sanitation and water. And this was amongst the main reasons why municipalities were not building sport infrastructure. The continuation of this model serves to guarantee that in the next 3 to 4 years, all municipalities in the country would have built at least one multifaceted facility under this intervention, and as such, facilities would be built in the areas of greatest need. Our involvement in the allocation of MIG for sport infrastructure, including support and monitoring of projects, has made it virtually impossible for projects to remain in the state of incompleteness, and therefore we are ensured that we will deliver on these facilities and ensure that we have the required results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rem Musi.
Ke a leboga mma. Ke lebogela tlhaloso ya gago Minister. The National Development Plan envisions a nation that participates fully and liberates itself from the conditions that hinder the flowering of its talent. Now the question is, Minister, what challenges have been experienced and how will they be addressed to ensure that there is improved access to participation opportunities through the approved National Facilities Plan? Ke a leboga modulasetulo wa ntlo.
Go leboga nna. Minister.
Thank you very much. Indeed, up to where we are, it has not been easy to ensure that we are of the same understanding with the municipalities. because as you would understand, some are in various stages of completion because of the fact that it took long to really have a buy-in of municipalities to understand on the model. And we hope that it is now going to move with more integration and also making sure that our facilitation is enhanced to make sure all critical role players participate. On top of it, the funding remains minimal, and we hope as we succeed and make sure it succeeds, we are able to complete these facilities. It will also encourage the National Treasury and COGTA as well as key role players to understand that the current 3% of what we have from the MIG is improved because sport remains a very powerful tool to make sure we redress the past imbalances. So we continue working with municipalities and we continue to ensure that currently with the funding that we have, we are able to provide a facility that could be used by both communities as well as schools in the nearby to open opportunities for our young people in schools and in our rural communities to have facilities where we can identify the talent and nurture it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Matiasa.
Thank you very much on behalf of Commissar Matias.
Okay.
The glaring reality, Honorable Minister, is that in South Africa we have a situation or a scenario of two worlds in one. One with better sporting facilities in the white dominated areas. And I cannot say dilapidated sporting facilities in the townships and rural areas because those, the sports in the townships has already been completely abandoned since the dawn of democracy. What are you doing as a Minister of Sport to inject love of sport in our own black peoples in townships and rural areas in order to ensure that they also participate, one, in sports effectively, and two, that they get good sporting facilities?
Thank you. Honorable Minister.
The honorable member maybe is not very close to what South Africa does when it comes to sport. South Africa is a very active nation, but what is critical for us to do is to ensure that we have facilities closer to the people so that not only those who used to benefit out of all the programs that we are doing continue to benefit. That is what we're seeking to address with the sports plan, moving towards our Vision 2030. So the situation, as I indicated on the plan that is there with the current budget, seeks to make sure that we target our rural areas, we target our townships with the infrastructure that we are building, and at the same time, the memorandum of understanding that has been signed with the Department of Basic Education seeks to ensure that we also are able to build infrastructure in schools, begin to make sure that our schools become active by having time to also do sport in schools themselves, and make sure that those facilities are able to open opportunity for our young people to also compete in the space of sport. It's not only those that were there. So maybe you would be interested to see or have the list of those facilities as we are doing that are spread throughout the country that we have already built, that we are rolling out as we speak to hand over to communities, plus all those that we have identified to build with our 287 million in this current financial year. Thank you.
Thank you. Babu Stol.
Ngiyabonga Sihlalo. Honorable ministers, What results have been obtained specifically in townships and rural areas in respect of access to sport facilities for people living in these areas? Facilities in township are in state of poor disrepair and dilapidated. What is being done to address this? What transformation is in place to develop and scout young talent in our rural areas and township? Ngoba njengoba sikhuluma nawe Minister, kunama boxing association akhona emalokishini. Awanakiwe futhi ke abantu abazama ukuthi bawavuse abananceda abathola kuhulumeni. Ngathokoza mase ngathola impendulo.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. As I indicated, with the start of this infrastructure rollout in 2016, as we speak now, we are handing over more than 11 of these facilities that have been completed to various townships and communities. And already we are working in partnership with the National House of Traditional Leaders to reach out to councils in the rural areas. So already that has allowed or has given us a space where we are able to channel our interventions in terms of our partnerships with scouting of talent in those rural areas, that today we have great strides in making sure that those young people, both from rural areas and the townships, are able to participate in sport, and they are part of the high performance sport as we speak. So those are kinds of trends that we see, and this financial year with the current budget I indicated earlier on, it seeks to also grow further. But I may also hastily say that private sector has come into play. We also have those sports facilities additional to those that government is funding, that are funded by sport through the sports trust. So that in itself has added up on the number of infrastructure that we have sent to both rural areas and urban areas. And as we roll it out, we also are making sure that the talent is identified there, and then we're able to give them bursaries to, enhance on their capabilities. And also, as part of the high performance program, they also participate. Not everybody, but indeed,
Thank you, Honourable
where
Minister.
we can afford. Thank you.
The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honourable Bergman.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, any answers that you give now surely must be speculative. The only real hard evidence that you can use to attest to this would be through a full and comprehensive field and facility audit, both in the communities and schools. Now, we've been told that this exercise has been undertaken, but when will we actually know the results, and when will we see the results?
Honourable Minister.
Maybe the honourable member may also go to the provincial legislature of the Western Cape, where I was sent a motion that was applauded by all members there when we went to hand over a sports facility in Beaufort West, which is the latest that we have handed out, and the Swellendam one. So you must go and get that, which is practically what has been in the Western Cape. I'm just mentioning the Western Cape, because in the other provinces we have a detail of what has been handed out, what is in the pipeline of handing out, and myself and the Deputy Minister, every second week of the month, we are handing over sports infrastructure, and the sports infrastructure is not targeting individual, because our communities themselves are now working together. So a sports infrastructure like one we're handing over in Limpopo accommodates about 11 schools, and clubs in the community are able, because there is such working together amongst communities, which is what we are seeking to build as we build cohesive communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Question number 48 has been asked by the Honorable Singh to the Minister of Health, the Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, thanks. It looks like the main people who must get overtime today is Honorable Singh and myself. Will get the overtime. Honorable Chairperson, the SAPRA have up to date received 26 applications for the cultivation and manufacturing of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol. These are active ingredients of cannabis, commonly known as dacha. Only 2 applicants wish to do research on the cannabidiol and product readiness for the cultivation of, only 2 applicants wish to do research on the formulation. But of the facilities which have been inspected, only 3 were in an advanced state of readiness for the cultivation of cannabis. The rest of the facilities did not have basic infrastructure, such as security, which was non-existent in some of the areas. Cultivation areas were not ready. No quality systems were developed. So at this stage, the applications, the balance of the 26 out of the 11, so 15 out of those are still to be inspected. But the findings are generally that many of them are not ready in terms of the requirements for the licensing process. In terms of black economic empowerment, of those which have been assessed, of those which have been received, 11 of them come from African applicants, 5 of them from black participants broadly, and 11 of them come from the white community applications, and 1 applicant has already withdrawn. So the process going forward is that the team from SAPRA will continue to do this evaluation of the applications, visit the sites where people have applied and interrogate that and see. And then where they find shortcomings, they give them the report back to say, you're not ready in terms of A, B, C, D. So it's up to the applicant to come back when they are ready with the required, to be within the requirements of the rules and regulations. Thanks, Chair.
The Honorable Singh.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Yeah, Honorable Deputy Minister, cannabis or marijuana or nzangu. That's the common names for these things that we saw before. But thank you for your response, Honorable Deputy Minister. I note that SAPRA are under immense logistical and resource constraints. And you've also indicated to us that there are 26 license applications that have been made. But I'm also advised, Honorable Deputy Minister, through you, Chairperson, that the current license application procedure, the requirement is between 10 and 15 million rand to satisfy agricultural startup requirements, that's to grow cannabis, and up to 30 million rand for a laboratory setup and compliance. Now, Honorable Deputy Minister, this rules out the small grower. I understand that you said that there are black economic empowerment companies and BBB, EEE, but how do we as government provide a way for smaller growers who have been growing this from many, many, many years? And I see Minister Nkwinti is looking at me because sometimes they say the best product comes from the Eastern Cape. How do we bring them into the fold? How are we going to assist? And in that regard, how are we going to assist with the cultivation of hemp? And has there been any discussion between you and the Minister of Trade and Industry and Agriculture on the cultivation of hemp, which is a much easier product to grow and which can bring in hundreds of millions of rand into our country? Thank you.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Indeed, it's true that SAPRA is under tremendous pressure, not only in terms of this particular product, but in terms of other pharmaceutical products, in terms of the slow processing, they are in the process of increasing capacity. As you would know, not long ago we passed the legislation for the establishment of SAPRA, moving away from the old structure, which was the Medicines Control Council. So they are actually in some transitional period, and they've given us a report in terms of how they are improving their capacity. We will indeed look at the points honorable member has brought up in terms of those requirements, the financial requirements in terms of setting up, because I must admit that one did not go into the detail of when they say a site is not ready, because they indicated that most of the applicants, when they go into, they will say that they are ready for inspection, but when they go in, they find that very basic things have not been done. But I was not aware that in terms of compliance, those are the kind of costs, because then indeed the honorable member will be right that it will exclude the small growers, will perpetuate inequality. I mean, we have inequality in other things. Now, if we then also have inequality on cannabis, which our people have been growing on the mountains for donkey years, I think it will definitely be very unfair. So we will indeed listen to the advice of the honorable member, go into some details, and also engage trade and industry in terms of the production and marketing of hemp as a product as well. Thanks.
The Honourable Carter.
It's a bit difficult to ask a question after Honourable Singh. Mine is pretty much aligned the same. So, Deputy Minister, I think it's just important to see, if we look at the regulations and controls that's been put in place, that it's been very difficult for example, the communities of the Duku forest, or even in the Drakensberg area, to ever compete with multinational companies. And it seems like it's going to be the multinational companies that will actually benefit from it, especially looking at the stringent regulations and controls. So just, how long will it still take, and what can we do actually to get the process going and faster, enabling our communities?
Honourable Deputy Minister.
Well, thanks, honourable member. Indeed, we will have to look at this, because the balance here is, on the one hand, to make sure that when the license is issued, there is adequate security protection in terms of possibility of abuse and contributing to the already a society which is already burdened with drug abuse, and make sure that there's adequate controls at the production and also at the processing level. So we will indeed go into look at that and see, together with our colleagues in trade and industry possibly, whether there are models which could be followed in terms of some sort of consortiums, cooperatives, and so on, which will then enable the small growers also to have a chance, provided they are organized and funded in a manner that they will still comply with the regulations, so that we also don't fall wrong on the side of the security of the product. Thanks, Chair.
The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honourable Matiase.
Thanks so much, Honourable Chair. Deputy Minister, the government has failed in all other industries, such as in mining, as in BE, as in all sorts of industries, right? The only industry which is untapped is around the exploitation of marijuana. And this is a windfall, this is a God-given industry which you must demonstrate if you are a revolutionary. And revolutionaries believe in practical action. You must demonstrate that that industry will be protected and it will be beneficiated to benefit our people. Now the question is, why are you wasting time? Why are you not putting resources to exploit and beneficiate marijuana and ensure that our people at least have got something to hold on? And in what time frames? When do you make a national announcement on the program to exploit marijuana for beneficiation and for medicinal purposes.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, Honorable Chair, I would not necessarily agree with the Honorable Member that this is the only economic avenue open for us to grow our economy. But it is one of those. So indeed, as I've said, we will go into the details of the requirements just to make sure that there is that balance, and also engage other players who are more knowledgeable on industrialization, the balance between regulation, security, of license conditions, but at the same time not inhibiting smaller players. So it's a point which we take home quite warmly, and we will indeed follow up. I'm not able at this stage to give you time frames, but we will definitely engage with SAPRA, with all the relevant authorities, to make sure that there's compliance, but at the same time there's room open through various schemes, such that the smaller players can come into this and exploit it. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honorable Mashlalela.
No, thanks very much, House Chair. Well, out of 26 applications, of which 11 were Africans, and taking into consideration the need to broadly representative of South African society, including gender, is it possible to expand, Deputy Minister, in terms of male and female applicants in relation to the 26 that you have received, and the extent to which yourself and SAPRA are putting mechanisms in place to make sure that you raise awareness to ordinary people so that they understand and seize this opportunity that's available at their disposal. Thanks.
The Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, Honorable Chair, at this stage, the indication which we got from SAPRA was that they didn't go into the gender representation, but they also indicated most of the applications were more in terms of entities, companies. So you would need to open up in terms of directorship and so on, and see who are leading those companies. So that's the step which we will take further. Now that the question has been raised, we will go further also to analyze that part. And I must admit that up to this stage, largely we've been getting individual inquiries from individuals and some companies. So it is correct, as the Honorable Member is raising, that I think we've been very cautious, maybe for good reasons, to communicate the opportunity. Because I'm sure Honorable Members will agree that when you communicate, you'll have to craft it in a very proper way so that it's not misinterpreted. It's an area which can easily be misinterpreted if you simply just say, there is now opportunity to grow cannabis, and you know, it can complicate things for Minister Cele. We may find ourselves talking at cross purposes with the Minister of Police. So that communication, I think it's accepted, but the content of it, I think, will have to be very carefully considered as to what message are we saying. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister. Question 49 has been asked also to the Minister of Health by the Honorable Mashlalela. The Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. Yes, Honorable Members, malnutrition continues to be a problem in the country. However, indications are that there is a decline in the number of deaths amongst children under 5 years from diarrhea, pneumonia, and severe acute malnutrition. The latter, the rate of severe acute malnutrition has declined by up to 38% over the 6 years from 2011-12 to 2016-17. Main causes of malnutrition, it's more of a socio-economic issue of poverty, poor hygiene, frequent infections such as diarrhea, pneumonia, but also people on treatment of chronic diseases such as TB and HIV. Household food insecurity plays a major role, of course. Poor breastfeeding in the small babies, and also poor levels of complementary feeding. Delayed identification of the risk of malnutrition. There are programs which have been put in place to deal with this. Of course, overriding that is addressing issues of poverty, food security, hygiene and nutrition, supply of micronutrients through fortification programs, such as fortifying food with vitamin A supplementation for the under 5, promotion of breastfeeding, also just implementation of the basic tool for children, which is the Road to Health booklet. Also dealing with the prevention of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, immunization, all those interventions. Growth monitoring also at the clinics, making sure that this is done. And so that children who are identified not to be growing or getting stunted can be identified early so that intervention can be made. And also through our community outreach programs, through community health workers, we also is part of the program that as they go into households, amongst the things they need to look at, if they are children, they must look at their road to health charts and be able to see if the child is not growing adequately or if there are signs of malnutrition. So there are steps which have been taken, but I want to emphasize also that this is a challenge. This is an area which goes beyond health. Is one of those which are social determinants of health. And if we improve the general well-being and income of society, then malnutrition will be dealt with. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
The Honorable Mashlalela.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy Minister. I'm sure that the Deputy Minister will agree with me that the problem of malnutrition is not simply solved by a mother choosing to breastfeed her child. Many infants who are breastfed have mothers who are severely undernourished themselves. If a mother does not have sufficient nutrients herself, she is much less likely to have sufficient nutrients in her breast milk. Thus, breast milk from undernourished women is often lacking sufficient quantities of vital vitamin B6 and folic acid, which leads to nutrition deficiency in the child. Is there any plan, Deputy Minister, to deal with the challenge of undernutritioned mothers so that we are able to make sure that when they breastfeed, they also not breastfeed themselves being undernutritioned?
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Indeed, you are right. And that's why we often say that actually to guarantee a healthy baby and a healthy infant, a healthy child under 5 and up to 18 years of age, doesn't start with childbirth. It actually starts during conception. And that's why the whole concept of the first 1,000 days speak exactly to that. I must admit that we can't claim to have reached that full integration of our systems, because it's a matter on which within the social sector, amongst others, we've been working with the Department of Social Development, but in terms of the actual comprehensive package of intervention, I would admit that we are not yet there. There's attempts to make sure that we can move in that direction, so that during antenatal visits, we're not only looking at whether the pregnant woman is not having high blood pressure, is not having diabetes, and all those kind of risks, and that the baby in the womb, the heart is beating well, and all those kind of things, and is growing accordingly, but also whether the mother themselves is well nourished, so that there can be early intervention, because the whole notion of the first 1,000 days is to make sure that from conception, we make sure that the mother herself it's very healthy, not only from disease, but also from in terms of a state of nutrition. So it's a matter which it's a work in progress. It's beyond just the health. It needs all the social players to be involved so that we can come with that kind of comprehensive intervention. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honorable Kubisa.
Ambonga sihlalo sekela ngongqoshe ngicabanga ukuthi uzophendula lo mbuzo ngesizulu ngoba wantshela igama elalishiwo president wathi uthi usibani bani nosibani bani ngifisa ukubuza ukuthi ngqongqoshe indaba esichitheka kakhulu edala ukuthi kube nokuthi izingane zingakhuli kahle enye mhlambe sekukhona lokuchitheka kokudla esekubolile noma sekuphelelwe isikhathi kuchitheke saka kezweni lakithi mhlambe ke uzothi akuwona kuphela umnyango wenu ofanele ubhekane nalento kodwa sekela ngqongqoshe komasipala bekukhona laba bantu bezempilo ebebehamba nje bebheka izitolo ukuthi ukudla kusekuphelelweni isikhathi besize beye futhi nasemakhaya ukubheka ukuthi izingane ezikhula kanjani mhlawumbe makubonakala ukuthi ziqhwalile besheshe ziya kwadokotela mhlawumbe bengabuza ukuthi umnyango wenza ini ukulekelela kuleso simo mhlawumbe uzothi usebenzisana neminye iminyango ethintekayo ngiyabonga.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, thanks, Honorable Chair. The honorable members are really testing my knowledge of isiZulu today. Well, I'll disappoint you because I can hear everything. I may not be able to respond in isiZulu, kodwa ngiyakuzwa ngikuzwile. Well, Honorable Chair, the honorable member specifically, I think, is zeroing on the issue of food security and in terms of making sure it's good quality and it's not wasted or expired. Now, this is an area which I must admit is a challenge, and it's a challenge because the area of health inspection, as we know it, in terms of our constitutional architecture, this is an area which, in terms of our current constitutional and legislative arrangement, has been devolved to local authorities. In the past, it was these professionals were employed at provincial level, but subsequently, in terms of the arrangement of the law and the constitution, it was devolved to local authorities. But we are working with our provinces and municipalities because there is an acceptance of the fact that municipalities are under pressure to deliver basic services in terms of sewer, water, electricity, streets, and so on. So this area of food security, food inspection of where food is being sold and so on, it's lacking behind. So with some of the provinces, we have come into some agreement to say, because of that is the reality, despite the fact that legally it's a competence of local authorities, the provinces should come on board and give that assistance. Because the things which you are mentioning are happening because where the responsibility lies, we don't have in most of municipalities the kind of competence of human resource.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
To do that, thanks.
The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honorable Majeke.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Minister, I am partly answered. I agree with you with that the mothers should get nutrition within the early 1,000 days of conception of pregnancy, as it is important for the development of a child. But what I would like to know is how far is the department in making sure that this is happening? Mothers are getting nutrition within the first 1,000 days, because the importance of the development of a child from conception, from a few months up to 2 years, it is very critical. Thank you.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Chair, the reality of this is that this is not an area which can be intervened purely by health. So that's why our, as I mentioned, it's featured in the social sector discussions. It's part of the area when we look at the concept of a comprehensive social security intervention. It's part of those services which we are looking at. It will mean, especially your Department of Social Development playing a major role, integrating the issues of the various grants, seeing where it can come in, the SASA in terms of food parcels. Can the clinic refer a pregnant woman if they identify that there's certain nutrition which is lacking, refer to SASA, for instance, for a food parcel. Those are the things which we need to work on. Agriculture also may need to come in terms of food banks and all those concepts. So it's an area which I must say at the current moment I'm not confident to say we do have a system, but it's something which we are working on, and I'm sure in due course we'll be able to arrive through that comprehensive social security approach, arrive at a product which will talk to this. Thanks.
The last follow-up question on this question will be asked by the Honorable Mulawutsi.
Land and malnutrition are linked to the hip. Deputy Minister, you have to be ignorant or blind if you cannot link the high level of malnourishment, especially to child malnourishment in this country to the land dispossession of the black majority by the white minority. Your government goes on about South Africa being a food secure country, but millions of households go hungry every night. We need household food security, and the only way this can be achieved is through expropriation of land without compensation. So that is, it can be nationalized or redistributed to the people.
Honourable Member, your
based on the need
time
of
is
the
now
ability of the-
expired. What's the question? Do you want to ask a question?
The question is, did your department had any input on the expropriation of land without compensation discussion as a key in fighting the high level of malnutrition in this country?
Honourable Deputy Minister.
Chair, I think the honourable member is trying to find blame where there is no blame. Because we have already, even in my earlier answer, I did say that in the comprehensive solution, we're looking at including cultivation of food. You can only cultivate food on land. So that goes without saying. But also, honourable member is aware that the organization I belong to, the African National Congress, is leading the process of, has been leading on the issues of land from its founding in 1912, not now. From 1912, the ANC has been leading and is still leading even now. So we are quite aware that many of these issues, including malnutrition, if people have land and implements and other supports, they will be able to cultivate their food and will be able to abolish malnutrition. So he's preaching to the converted already. He's trying to find some way, but there's just no entry point because you are already ahead of him. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Minister. We now get to question 51, asked by the Honourable Ndaba, also to the Minister of Health. The Honourable Deputy Minister.
Honourable Chair, this in relation to the clinic in Ekurhuleni, yes, this clinic, the Goba Clinic, used to be a municipal clinic under the Ekurhuleni Metropolitan, but it has recently been converted or taken over by the province within the Ekurhuleni Health District of Gauteng. That is with effect from April 2017. It has moved from municipal clinic to provincial clinic. So it is true that there are infrastructure challenges and the clinic does need improvement. At the time of it being taken by the province, the province had already placed other clinics under their capital program. in the area. Just to give an example, there's a Magagula Heights Clinic, Kwatema, J. Dumani Community Health Center, and also North Mid. The infrastructure plans for these facilities were put on hold as a result of budget constraints, but will be considered in the next financial year. This means, therefore, that the Goba Clinic will be included by the Gauteng province in the next MTF capital project program for the Ekurhuleni district, health district. The province has no additional posts for the clinic at the current moment. However, staff are being redeployed from other facilities to augment the staff members at this particular clinic. This clinic and other local clinics. This has resulted in the clinic being able to increase hours of operation. From previously operating when it was under the municipality, it was an 8 to 4, 5 days clinic. It has now expanded services from 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening on a daily basis from the 1st of July of 2018. So the need for more staff is being considered as funds become available, and as I've already said, in terms of facility improvement, it has already been put on the next MTF in terms of Gauteng clinic upgrade program. Thanks, Honorable Chair.
Honourable members, I've been informed that the Honourable Nkonzo will take charge of the question in the absence of the Honourable Ndaba. The Honourable Nkonzo.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. With regards to general infrastructure challenges within health facilities, what is the Department or National Department of Health doing to accelerate infrastructure planning, delivery, maintenance, and revitalization? Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Deputy Minister.
Well, Chair, we over some years now, we have been working with the National Treasury in terms of infrastructure grants, part of which being specifically in the NHI pilot program areas in the district of NHI pilot, but also we also have an infrastructure grant which is distributed from national, working with all the provinces where we're doing regular monitoring, planning, and implementation monitoring in all the provinces, both at all the levels from the primary health. We do monitoring at a regular basis to see how many clinics are being upgraded, what is the progress, and where it's necessary, make sure that our technical team gives support to the provinces. So as much as one can say everything is working, according to plan, you get challenges here and there of capacity, sometime in terms of the availability of funds for all the areas which need attention. But we do have a system, and we do monitor, and we do support our districts and our provinces in terms of implementation of infrastructure upgrade. Thanks, Chairperson.
The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honourable James. May I just ask the Honourable Member of the day who's standing in front of the Honourable James to take a seat, please?
Hanshan. Thank you, House Chair. How much has the lack of money been made worse by the first 0.2 billion rand that vanished when Brian Hlonga was NEC? Thank you, Chair.
The Honourable Deputy Minister.
Chairperson, I think it's this is not a relevant question to this particular matter. First of all, I don't have the knowledge of somebody making money vanish. I'm sure the relevant authorities which capacity to verify that kind of allegation should be the ones for the question to be directed. But I must just say that in implementing these programs of infrastructure, because this is what it's all about, we do try by all means to work with our colleagues in the provinces to make sure that there can be accountability If we say that this is the plan, this is the estimated cost, there must be a reason. You can't just have a cost variation, escalation, which is inexplicable. So those are the kind of steps which we are taking to make sure that money is not lost in the implementation. But what the honourable member, I have no knowledge of that. Thanks.
Honorable Sitole.
Asibonge sihlalo, mhlonishwa ngqongqoshe. Ngicabanga ukuthi i-clinic yaseGoba iyona clinic ekahle ongethwele umthwalo omningi wabantu abaningi. Kodwa inkinga ebhekana nayo ukuthi uma ukhuluma ngeprovince yaseGauteng ayinayo amalokho ama-resources yokuthi ikwazi ukunceda leya clinic. Kangangokuba ngisho abantu bakhona abanye bakhuphuka bazoncedwa iphenduka ethokoza. Umbuzo uthi ikuphi engakwenza njengo-national department ukunceda iprovince nokunceda isimo sokuhlupha kwabantu ngoba infrastructure ekhona lapha ayisavumi indala eclinic yaseGoba. Ngiyathokoza.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. Honourable Chair, through you, as the response has indicated, we have an undertaking from the relevant authority, which is the Gauteng Health, that Goba Clinic is in their plans. So the best we can do is to make sure that we hold them accountable. We'll work with them through our infrastructure team in the National Department, because once a province says to us, this is the priorities for the coming year in terms of the infrastructure grant, we can then, what we can do through our team, monitor that when the submissions are given for the next financial year, we can actually check whether this clinic, amongst the primary health, is actually included in terms of the implementation of the next financial year and monitor going forward. So that's the undertaking we can give to the member, that indeed we will follow up through the submission of the actual plans, through the financial plans which they are going to submit, and satisfy ourselves that it's not just as an answer, but it is actually, because we will see those plans. All the provinces do submit to us their plans for the year, for each financial year, in terms of infrastructure plans. So we'll be able to monitor. Thanks.
The Honorable Shlonyana.
Thank you, House Chair. Deputy Minister, this is a yes or no question and no speeches, please. Deputy Minister, our public healthcare system is collapsing. Clinics are falling apart. Equipment is broken. There are staff shortages, and our people are crying because clinics are not always open. It is common sense that people do not choose when they get sick, so it makes no sense for clinics, especially public clinics, to not be open 24 hours, 7 days a week. As the EFF, we are tabling a bill which will address this problem so that the clinics will be open 24/7. Will you support this bill? Thank you.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Well, Honorable Chair, the member goes on to lead by a wrong example. She gives a very long speech and then expect a yes or no. She should have led by example, just 2 words maybe, and then say answer with 2 words. Now, to answer you, Honorable Member, you see, you assume that the reason why some clinics don't operate 24 hours is because they lack a law or a regulation. That's not the case. There are too many issues which come into play in terms of, and that will be a disastrous bill. Disaster. That will be very disastrous because there are very clear conditions under which you have to prioritize to say this area. To give an example, there are clinics which operate in areas where generally they service working people. You know, people who are there 8 to 5. And the service is provided so that when they are at work, when they fall sick, they can walk across and get service. At 5 o'clock, they knock off, they go home. if they fall sick at home. So why are you going to keep a clinic, nearer to workplaces for 24 hours? Wasteful expenditure. So there are conditions which must be examined, determined. Does this area need 24-hour service? And then you designate it. So I'm afraid if the EFF ever comes to power, the government will collapse. If you're going to do 24-hour clinics everywhere in the country, then the whole government will collapse in that system. Thank you.
The next question is question number 57 that has been asked by the Honorable Glulane to the Honorable Minister of Sport and Recreation. The Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of the Women and Sport policy would be to redress the imbalances women in sport and recreation in South Africa through ensuring that access to resources is achievable and fully inclusive. This will ensure empowerment through conscious and committed provision of equal opportunities for sustaining full participation, recognition, and development, irrespective of ability, disability, race, class, sexual preference, religious beliefs, and cultural diversity. The purpose is to increase participation of women at all levels of sport and recreation in order to achieve gender equity. Further, the policy will also consider the contents of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, Act number 4 of 2000, which ensures equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms by every person and provide measures to facilitate the eradication of unfair discrimination, hate speech, harassment, particularly on the grounds of race, gender, and disability. This policy will incorporate resolutions or call to action or declarations of the various international women and sport conferences and domesticate them. This will also address itself to incentives for companies sponsoring women in sport in the form of higher tax rebates. It will look into recognition and accolades for companies sponsoring women's sport. It will also lobby CASA for sport broadcasting regulations, which includes a quota for women's sport coverage. It will work with Commission on Gender Equality and Department of Women to call on public hearings in which the national federations will be called upon to outline their immediate plans to achieve gender parity in sport in line with the provisions of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention. It will also allow for ministerial directives in line with the findings of the EPG and enforce those directives by linking the annual findings to achievements. And it will also consider the new category of women's recognition awards of the ministerial recognitions. So these measures, together with the political leadership and tone, should be sufficient to ensure that greater progress in the medium term is achieved. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The Honourable Glulane.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Thank you, Mhlonitsha Siyabonga. I want to tell you that would love to support you on what you have just said. In the world of the male-dominated sport, you know what? In order that you must achieve my responses, I may ask you, may you then advise this House what your short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan in achieving this objective, because you need to be very strong and will support you as the committee.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee. Women in sport in the month of August converged for the first time as women across the spectrum to begin a dialogue that seeks to explain what this women and sport policy entails. And as part of the process moving forward, because we also don't want to have dialogues that will end up without action, by making sure that already the draft that we have, which was the basis of the initiation of the dialogue, as well also commemorating the centenary of Mama Albertina Sisulu, presented us and some inputs that begin to chart a way forward towards our October program, where the management of the department is convening a workshop, and we will try to finalize the inputs into our document. And in November, looking into having a signed off departmental document and draft to Gazette for public input, because by March 2019, we want to convene a mini workshop, a conference for women, so that we can present this and finalize the policy that we want to implement by 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The next follow-up question is to be asked by the Honourable Mhlongo.
Thanks, Chairperson. Minister, we do support women's development in sports. But I wanted to find out, Minister, why especially do you use grouping for us to make sure that we address the imbalances of the past? For an example, Minister, you are not adhering to your own, you've admitted today that you believe EPG, but using grouping. Now I'm asking you exactly, do you exactly understand, or you'll be happy with the tool that you are using, outcome wayo, because their outcomes are failing us. Now you are coming up with a policy that will take time, as you are saying, we'll look into in 2019. Now what I'm asking you, Minister, do you believe EPG, but why are you using groups?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much. Maybe you did not hear me well, Honourable Member. EPG is a tool that I use as the Minister and the Department of Sport and Recreation to drive transformation in the department. So I'll continue to support and have confidence in it moving forward, because I set up the agenda for what they have to look at in terms of the transformation of sport in South Africa. The next thing is that South Africa and the population is as unequal. So we have to deal with issues of inequality, we have to deal with issues of poverty, we have to deal with issues of employment, and therefore you have vulnerable groups in women, in youth, and people with disabilities. And looking into the program in the Department of Sport and Recreation and in the sports fraternity in general, those are the vulnerable groups, and at least at the moment, we have programs that we can see progress on, although not yet satisfied, that are youth-oriented as well as people with disability-oriented. But women specifically, it's happening in several corners. It's not integrated. It is not getting the kind of attention, which is what we seek to ensure that all our vulnerable groups are part of our prioritized program and are infused into the overall program. Thank you.
The Honourable Sitole.
Siyabonga Sihlalo. Mhlonishwa Ngqongqoshe, engithi ominye imibuzo uzuyiphendulile, kodwa engifuna ukwazi ukuthi inhlelo zini eninazo njengomnyango zokunceda abesifazane ku-boxing, ngoba uma ubheka ilapho abangancedakali khona, ilapho futhi ama-facilities abo yokuthi bakwazi mhlampe ukutraina nokwenza izinto ze-boxing ezingekho. Ngicela ukuzwa nje ukuthi iziphi inhlelo ekhona emnyangweni.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. I can see Honourable Stolle and boxing. As long as you don't talk boxing, then you have not answered it. Honourable Member, the programs for boxing are part of programs that Boxing South Africa undertakes and reports on. We fund them according to what we seek to do in terms of their program. There are programs and that are talking to the transformation that we talk about. At the moment, I won't have specific programs as I'm standing here, but I'm sure outside of this house, I can get back to have the outline of what boxing is doing and is reporting to us. But as you know, they are experiencing a lot of challenges as a structure, which is what we're seeking to look at in terms of the governance of boxing in South Africa. Because if at leadership level you have those challenges, then it means it impacts negatively on the very programs that you honorable member is asking about. Thank you.
There's a member from the EFF.
Thank you very much, Chair. Makhatebe, women, especially black women, are the most oppressed in this country. They are emotionally abused, physically abused, and mentally abused. Many of the ministers in your government have made speeches this month saying we must protect women. But what is the government doing? Caster Semenya is an example of successful black female athlete, but she continues to be attacked by racist, colonial, and patriarchal international sporting agencies and the media. So I want to know, what is the government doing to protect Caster Semenya from international sport agencies and media who are attacking her and her body? Thank you very much.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. I was earlier on articulated sport and women and sport policy seeks to bring together all what is happening and look into how we can support and assist women, as I have indicated earlier on. And with regard, we agree with your sentiment, because this is what is happening, because black women are in the majority of our South African population. So the oppression of women means it has a bigger impact when it comes to that class. We have taken it upon ourselves to make sure that what happens to Caster Semenya cannot be led to be Caster Semenya's issue, because it has got an impact in future for the rest of the participation. So the issue before the IAAF, as you would know, it is supported by us as government. That is why when it initially came up formally, we had to make sure that SASCOC, its a medical team, as well as that of Athletics South Africa, are made to come together and put together South Africa's position to challenge that. And Athletics South Africa had interactions with IAAFA to communicate our view, and they agreed to disagree, that the matter should be taken to the Court of Arbitration. It is before that Court of Arbitration, and therefore we have assembled a very powerful team that we think will come back with better results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Honourable Members, the time allocated for questions has expired. Outstanding replies received will be printed in Hansard. The Secretary will read the last order of the day.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services on regulations to give effect to the recommendations of National Forum of the Legal Profession.
The Honourable Mutapu, a member of the committee, will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairperson and honourable members. The Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Service reports as follows. These are regulations made in terms of Section 109A of Legal Practice Act of 2014, dated 22 August this year. The Minister tabled the regulations in terms of Section 1091A, 1C of Legal Practice Act, giving effect to the recommendations of the National Forum of the Legal Profession. Water, please. The said regulations were referred to the Committee for consideration and reporting. The Minister is required within 6 months after receiving recommendations from the National Forum to make regulations by publication in the Gazette in order to give effect to these recommendations. In terms of Section 1091C, however, the regulations must be approved by Parliament before they are published in the Gazette. My apologies. On 1508 this year, the committee was briefed and deliberated on the contents of the regulations, and the committee adopted the regulation with the recommendation that the National Assembly resolved to approve them. Chairperson, the Minister's introductory letter to the regulations informed Parliament of the urgency of finalizing these regulations for the new South African Legal Practice Council to be established before 31st October this year, the date on which the National Forum will cease to exist, as provided for in Section 96(4) of the Legal Practice Act. In context, the Legal Practice Act 2014 recognizes that fragmentation within the legal profession in many ways and is compounded further by disparate laws that apply in different parts of the country. The profession has been slow to transform. The demographics of the profession, for example, still do not reflect those of the country. Even broadly, entry to the profession is a challenge for many aspirant practitioners, especially those lacking resources at the start of the career, and restrictive and outdated prescripts create further hurdles. Chairperson, access by members of the public to legal services can be limited and is compounded by the cost of legal fees, which can be exorbitant. The Act, therefore, amongst others, provides for a legislative framework for the transformation and restructuring of the legal profession, establishing a South African Legal Practice Council as well as provincial councils to regulate the affairs of the legal practitioners and set norms and standards. I therefore, Chairperson, on behalf of the Portfolio Committee, present this report for adoption by the Honourable House. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I now recognize the Honourable the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
I move that the report be adopted.
The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections? There are objections. I put the question. Those in favour will say aye. And those against will say no. I think the ayes have it.
Chair, the DA would like to make a declaration.
The DA.
Thank you, Chairperson. Blondie, you've got room to talk. These regulations, in terms of the Legal Practice Act, are intended to give effect to the recommendations of the National Forum of the Legal Profession. Section 97(1) of the Legal Practice Act requires the National Forum of the Legal Profession to make recommendations to the Minister on several matters. The Minister, after receiving the recommendations, is required to make regulations in consultation with the National Forum in order to give effect to the recommendations of the National Forum. The majority of the members of the Portfolio Committee on the 22nd of August adopted the approach, somewhat regrettably, of recommending that the National Assembly approve the regulations. The Democratic Alliance opposed the recommendation. The reasons for the opposition of the approval of the regulations are that they effectively implement a quota system for the composition of the Council. The recommendation set out that the Council should be comprised as follows. In respect of attorneys, 4 black women, 3 black men, 1 white woman, 2 white men. a 70-30 race ratio and a 50-50 gender ratio. And in respect of advocates, 2 black women, 2 black men, 1 white woman and 1 white man. 63-33 race ratio and a 50-50 gender ratio. Gauteng has a slight deviation to accommodate their greater numbers. The implementation of a quota system for the council seriously undermines the independence of the professions and the individuals involved. Such a system is demeaning with regard to the individual professionals involved, suggesting that they are not equal role players in all respects, and that they need the cushioning effect of a quota system in order to regulate their own profession. We hold the view that these regulations therefore contravene the equality clause as contained in the Bill of Rights, and that a quota system cannot be justified in terms of the limitations clause in the Bill of Rights, for the simple reason that the positions on the council are not positions of employment. Considerations of employment equity are therefore not applicable to the composition of the council. Transformation of the leadership of the legal profession has advanced enormously without any quota system in place, and cannot ever necessitate this type of strict racial and gender quota system reminiscent of apartheid. The DA cannot support such a blatant implementation of a quota system. I thank you.
The EFF.
Chairperson, the EFF generally support the recommendations made by the National Forum for Legal Practitioners and the regulation that ensued. We are particularly happy with the transformative legislation changes brought about by the Legal Practice Act. The specific references to visible transformation of the legal profession. The recommendations of the National Forum for Legal Practitioners take this need to a new tangible level. The instance is that the new South African Legal Practice Council must be constituted in a manner that reflects national demographic in a bold recommendation worthy of our support. This bold recommendation ought to be taken up by the different spheres of the government too, and ensure that all legal contracts given by the state do reflect these national demographics. We cannot continue having the government briefing predominantly white lawyers. The only weakness in the recommendation is the lack of consensus on the training requirements for candidate attorneys and pupils. This is the most exploitative stage in the legal profession. Candidate attorneys are paid peanuts by law firms. We would have liked to see at least a minimum wage payable to both candidates, attorneys, and to pupils to ensure at least that they can sustain themselves while training to be fully admitted as attorneys and advocates. Despite our reservation on the matter on training, we support the regulations. Thank you, Chairperson.
The IFP.
Thank you, House Chairperson. I deliver this declaration on behalf of my colleague and a member of this committee, the Honorable Nkosi E.M. Buthelezi MP. At the outset, let me state that the IFP supports this report. Support the critical role that National Forum provides in the transformation and restructuring of the legal profession that is reflective of the diversity and demographics of the country as so well established and set out in the Legal Practice Act. Justice must be accessible to all South Africans, and legal training, article and pupillage just as accessible to all of our young aspiring lawyers and advocates. There are many challenges that must be faced and navigated by the Minister of Justice as he grapples with transformation, and in respect of this, the forum and soon to be instituted council will play a vital role and necessary check and balances. The IFP supports the regulation giving effect to recommendations of National Forum of the Legal profession tabled in terms of Section 1091C of Legal Practice Act 2014. I thank you.
The ANC.
Thank you very much, House Chair. The ANC rises in support of the regulations drafted in line with Section 109, 1A of the Legal Practice Act. The Legal Practice Act seeks to provide a legislative framework for the transformation and restructuring of the legal profession that embraces the values underpinning the Constitution and to ensure that the rule of law is upheld. The Act seeks to broaden access to justice. Transformation of the legal profession is a prerequisite for the establishment of a society based on social justice, human rights, and the rule of law. The Legal Practice Act is a reflection of the ANC's commitment to the transformation of the legal profession and the judiciary in line with the Constitution. The Act gives the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services and the unified legal profession the authority to drive the transformation of the legal profession, which is a prerequisite for the transformation of the judiciary itself. Fragmentation of the legal profession between attorneys and advocates and their regulatory bodies is not only costly and burdensome, it also hampers on enhanced access to justice. Hence the need for a more uniform approach. Taking cognizance of this, the Act establishes one national regulatory body for all legal practitioners, both attorneys and advocates. Section 7.2 of the Legal Practice Act provides that when constituting the council, the racial and gender composition of South Africa must be taken into account. It is surprising why the DA objects to this racial composition. The DA must remember that the recommended composition is a compromise that was reached between the 21-member forum, representing a variety of different constituents. The members of the forum, who represent different sectors and bodies, went to their constituents and came back with recommendations based on the need to unify the legal profession and to ensure a regulatory body that is representative of all legal practitioners, both black and white. The recommended composition is a compromise that has been reached for the benefit of the entire profession. It is quite surprising why the DA continues to object on the basis of race. They ignore the reality that if the legal profession is not representative, then it can never be transformed. Currently, of the 26,700 practicing attorneys in our country, 15,000 are white, 11,600 are black, meaning that 57% of the attorneys are white. Of the advocates profession, 1,834 are white and 1,249 are black. This means that over 59% of the advocates profession is white. Yet the DA objects to this arrangement. The recommended composition of the 9 provincial councils was a compromise. Initially, the composition of the provincial councils was supposed to be based on the actual numbers of legal practitioners. But because there are less advocates than attorneys, it was decided to have at least 2 advocates, 1 black and 1 white, to ensure that advocates are represented and also to ensure that there's greater diversity in the profession. You see, it is not surprising that the DA can object to this. The DA is living with a cancer. The cancer in the DA is the dominance of the white caucus of the DA in the politics of the Democratic Alliance. The white caucus of the DA does not have any issue to do with any people of color. You see, the person who has seen that this white dominance of the white caucus in the DA is a cancer is the brave and unrelenting Councillor Victor Manyati. Councillor Manyati succinctly expressed how this dominance of the white caucus in the DA is a cancer to this country. He expressed the unhappiness of the black councillors in the DA throughout the country. Actually, Councillor Manyati should come to Parliament and address the black caucus of the DA. The DA is no good for the politics of this country. The DA can never take this country forward. And as a result, I would like to thank all those parties that supported these regulations. As the ANC, we support the legal practice regulations.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any further declarations? If not, there were objections when the question was put. Honourable Waters.
Chair, the DA calls for division. Thank you.
A division having been called, the bells will be rung for 5 minutes. Order, honorable members. I would like to remind members that they may only vote from their allocated seats, and when requested to do so, the members must simply indicate their vote by pressing the appropriate button. If a member inadvertently presses the wrong button, the member may thereafter press the correct button. The last button pressed will be recorded as the member's vote. The question before the House is that the report of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services be adopted. Are all members now in their allocated seats? Voting will now commence. Those in favor of the report should press the yes button. Those against should press the no button. And those wishing to abstain should press the abstain button. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Yes or no, member?
My member, her machine is not working.
Okay, will the table just record the members' vote, please?
Chairperson.
Yes or no, member?
Honorable Brettenbach didn't vote.
We'll check the voting schedule, honorable member. Order, honorable members, the voting session is now closed. Honorable members, the result of the division is as follows. Those in favor, 154. Those against, 4. There's 1 abstention. And the question is accordingly agreed to. Honorable members, that concludes the business for the day, and the House is adjourned.